What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. What if Naruto built ultimate harem with all kunoichis in Desert Island Part 3? If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Naruto woke up and yawned as he looked at the roof of his room in the large ship that he was currently on board of and wondered for a brief moment just where he was, and he quickly recalled just where he was in that same instant, on a boat, escorting Tsunade, who had gone on an important social, diplomatic mission to Snow, Spring Country. The blonde ninja yawned and couldn't help but smile as he met up with the princess of Snow Country once again after not setting foot on the place for quite a long time, though he had wondered why he was the one selected by Tsunade to accompany him to Snow, Spring Country to secure some new trade and diplomacy relations with Spring Country. He had been proud to see the country in its mode of spring, and he visited the tomb of not just Koyuki Kazuhana's deceased family but her retainer as well. Though she used her formal name now, Koyuki asked Naruto to address her as Yukie, and she had been busy with her duties as both actress and princess, leader of her previous home, and she had been delighted to see Naruto again and had commented on how much he had grown since they had met all those years ago. She even told him that he had grown to be quite the eye candy, and Naruto blushed, remembering the time he had gotten a picture of him being kissed on the cheek by the princess when he was recovering at the hospital in Snow, Spring Country when he attacked and defeated the former leader of Yukie's uncle Dodo with the Rainbow Rasengan. Tsunade was calm the whole time, and the two leaders began to work on a better trade relationship with both Konoha and Yukigakure for any worthwhile technology that Konoha could use to help with its defense and civilian use. Naruto wondered just why he had been picked for the operation, as he knew that the Anbu were the ones responsible for the safety of the Hokage, or even a number of the other teams could have handled the load. Sakura was taking some time to be with her folks while Sai was busy with his usual reading of more books to help him be more open to others. He had wondered why Shizune had not come along, as the two worked together longer than he knew. Tsunade explained that she had no knowledge of Snow Country, and since he had been there on a previous mission and was friends with the leader, she would need his help, not to mention she wanted to make sure that he didn't try anything foolish if he had stayed in Konoha. And that was very much true, as there was a chance he would have gone looking for Sasuke again, and while there was Jiraiya and the others who would keep an eye on him, the Hokage felt it better that he came along for the ride. Besides, she wanted to see just how much he could handle when he would be on a solo mission. He had resisted the idea, but Tsunade reminded him rather quickly that she was the leader of the village and not him, and besides, this was a chance for him to learn the diplomatic needs of being Hokage if he ever took the position. Not everyone in the council agreed with the idea, but they were not able to dissuade Tsunade. Not even the old lady Kaharu and old man Homura could change her mind, which was surprising at the moment. They had spent at least 2 days there in Snow, Spring Country for Yukie to tour them all over the cities and villages that had grown and prospered under her rule, and many of the people loved and revered their princess. And Yukie and him traded stories back and forth and even spent time reminiscing, while Tsunade watched on. After the mission was successful, Tsunade seemed a bit more relaxed. She had been apparently strained and tired for some reason ever since he and Yukie had been catching up on old times, though Naruto wondered why. Ah hell, I'd better go see how Tsunade Obasan is doing right now. With that in mind, Naruto got off the bed and got dressed in his usual clothes and left the room and headed for the bar on the ship, knowing full well the Hokage's penchant for drinking sake whenever she could. He hoped he didn't have to carry her again like they had done when they had ridden on this boat before. He arrived at the bar, and sure enough, the blonde Hokage was there resting on the bar, snoring lightly. He sighed and knew that his hopes of not having to carry the blonde woman was down the drain for the day. However, his eyes quickly hardened when he spotted a band of shady passengers who were also drunk, eyeing the Hokage in a very lecherous way. He was tempted to let them try something on Tsunade for her to pound them dead, but seeing the sake bottles nearby told her that the Hokage was out of it. The bartender looked up and recognized him and called Naruto out. "Hey kid, better help your friend to her room." "Got it." As Naruto came on the bar, one of the sailors who was eyeing the drunken and sleeping Tsunade came towards time and stopped him by getting between him and the still snoring Hokage. "Get lost, brat. We'll be the ones to take her to her room." Naruto glared and it didn't take long for the other sailors to come and join their friend and Naruto was not in the mood to be picking a fight with these guys. But the fact of the matter was, he had no choice at the moment as he replied. You are not going to lay a hand on her. If you, I'll knock you down. The men laughed and the leader replied. Oh yeah. With that, the drunken men attacked. Naruto moved in and attacked with his full repertoire of ninja skills right in the money for the battle ahead. Later. Geez, I think Tsunade Obasan's really out of it. I wish she didn't drink so much. Naruto grumbled as he carried Tsunade back to her room. He had beaten the drunken passengers and he was able to explain the situation to the arriving guards and the captain who was not happy with the fact that a fight had broken out on his ship. The bartender supported Naruto and explained things further to the angry but patient captain, and after seeing that Naruto had acted in self-defense and had tried to settle things peacefully before the fight broke out, he let the blonde ninja off the hook and took the drunken passengers who were out cold to the infirmary. This left Naruto with the effort of taking the blonde Hokage to her room, and while he was having a hard time due to the Hokage being taller and heavier than him, he was doing an admirable job and he knew that it was due to his physical growth and training, and doing the same thing with Jiraiya when the pervy sage also took the sake bottle, but he swears that Tsunade was a far heavier drinker than his Sannin sensei. It was also the fact that she was very attractive despite using henge, and when he carried her, she would come closer to him, and the fact that her very much attractive face would be close in her. Brr, damn it, I got to focus here, got to get to her room. He makes it to the room and with some effort, gets her keys and opens the door and then takes Tsunade towards her bed in the room and with some effort, manages to get the drunk and still sleeping female Hokage on her bed, and with him removing her sandals and jacket, though the last item required some serious maneuvering and effort. As soon as he was done, he gently lay Tsunade on the bed and placed on a blanket, allowing him to visibly relax as he sat down on a nearby chair and look at Tsunade, as she lay there resting and in a much better state. He had no doubts in his mind that he should leave but couldn't help but stay there, as he knew that while she was more than able to take care of herself in a fight, her heavily intoxicated state told him that leaving her alone was not a good idea. He had no doubts those drunkards from before would no doubt cause trouble looking for her, though they no doubt had any idea that they were dealing with Sannin Tsunade. He was not going to leave Tsunade alone in her current state and knew that it was going to be a long night. He reached for the nearby closet and found some spare pillows and a blanket. With those in hand, he spotted the couch nearby, as Tsunade had a more spacious room than his own, befitting her rank as the Hokage. The couch was wide and spacious enough for him to lie on, but he was not going to sleep just yet. He looked at Tsunade and saw that she was now resting peacefully, but as he was about to bunk in for the night, he heard her whisper something, a name. He knew that he had to be careful as he leaned and listened and heard the name again. Dan. The blonde ninja moved away as he recognized the name Tsunade mentioned from somewhere and quickly realized that this was the name of Shizun's uncle, who he recalled was Tsunade's fiancé years before her self-imposed exile from Konoha. He then sees a tear run down the female Hokage's face and heard the name again, in a softer tone, making Naruto wince in sympathy for Tsunade. She misses him a lot. I wonder how things would have turned for Tsunade Obasan had he lived. The blonde ninja knew about the losses Tsunade suffered long ago from Shizun and wondered how she managed to keep living afterwards. But he decided not to think about it too much. He had a job to do, and that was to make sure no one on this ship got the bright idea of looking for Tsunade. He had a feeling those drunken passengers would already be at it the very second they got their wits back into themselves and recalled what happened at the bar, but there was a chance some of the other people on the ship would also take a stab at finding and attacking Tsunade and do gods only knew what. No way am I going to let them lay a hand on Tsunade Obasan. With those thoughts in mind, the blonde genin lay down and went to rest, trying to get back to the sleep he missed out when he woke up earlier. He knew that he would look a bit odd being with Tsunade in her room, but he was not going to make a mistake and allow anyone to harm Tsunade while she slept, and to prove his point, he took out a kunai and kept it ready for him to use on the off chance someone was dumb enough to try and come in here. The next day. OWWW, what a night. Tsunade woke up and yawned a bit and was surprised to find herself in the plush bed of her room. She rubbed her eyes and thought to herself. How did I get here? Last I recall I was drinking in the bar, and fell asleep. Who carried me here? It was then that she turned to the side as she heard some light snoring, and there on the couch nearby was a certain blonde genin who was rather tired. She got out of her bed and saw that it was indeed Naruto who was sleeping soundly on the couch. She had thought that he was sleeping early after eating all the ramen that Princess Yukie had personal packed for him on the return trip to the port city and then off to Konoha, so why was he here in her room, on her couch? Normally she would have yanked the blanket off of him and demanded an answer, but she relaxed and saw that he looked tired and there was a kunai on his hand in his grip, as if he was expecting an attack all of a sudden. She decided to get some answers from Naruto at a later time. He was tired and needed some sleep, and besides, he was too cute to wake up. With that, she decided to visit the bartender of the ship. Since he was awake most of the night working, he would be able to tell her what happened. As she left the room, she arrived in the bar and sat down as the bartender gave her a drink. You seem all right. That young kid must have stayed with you to help keep you safe. You mean Naruto Uzumaki? What happened when I was asleep from all the drinking? The bartender told the Hokage about how Naruto was about to help her to get to her room when a band of drunken passengers tried to accost him and get her. The Hokage was angry at that but was pleasantly surprised at how Naruto defeated the group without relying too heavily on his kage bushin, and he was able to beat the men and reasoned with the angry captain and the guards. After that, the Hokage was impressed and smiled as she decided to reward Naruto in some way. Back in Tsunade's room, Naruto was a heavy sleeper and it took some effort to wake him up, but the smell of food was more than enough to get him awake as he heard his stomach growl like a hungry fox for the food, and there was Tsunade with a smile on her face, and there on a folding table was a large bowl of hot chef's special ramen and other foods including hot bread, chicken soup, roasted beef and a large pitcher of cold water and a glass. He was surprised and looked at Tsunade and she replied, "This is for what you did for me last night. Eat up, Naruto-kun, you deserve it." Naruto smiled and tasted the ramen and found the ramen to be very good, not the same as the ramen he would normally eat in the Ichiraku ramen stand back in Konoha, but great nevertheless. He was able to finish the massive bowl and finished off the food in record time, making even Tsunade look on in shock and surprise at how quickly Naruto was able to pack away all that food and drink in one setting. As soon as he was done with the food and drink, Naruto sighed and looked at Tsunade. "Thanks for the meal, Tsunade Obasan." The Hokage had a slight twitch in her eye at the comment but ignored it as she knew that despite how disrespectful it sounded, it was Naruto's nature and his past of being mistreated as a youth that made him suspicious and untrusting of those in power. Something that she knew her former sensei, the late Sarutobi, managed to soften along with her. He was so like her brother Nawaki, and it made her think about how Nawaki would have turned out had he been alive. She closed her eyes for a moment as memories of her brother came back, and it hurt to think about that. "Tsunade Obasan, are you all right?" Tsunade didn't respond for a second and then opened her eyes to see Naruto looking at her with great worry and concern in his eyes, and she couldn't help but feel happy with the show of genuine concern the blonde genin was giving towards her, and she spoke to him in order to assure him that she was all right. "I'm fine, Naruto-kun, just had some thinking to do." Naruto looked at her with concern and saw that she was not in the mood for a long discussion, and he decided to leave it be. However, he was more than willing to help Tsunade out if she wanted or needed it. He took the dishes and left for the kitchen and handed them back to the chef, leaving Tsunade to recollect herself for the time being. While she was in the room, she was allowed to say in for the time being. The Hokage silently thanked the silence as she looked out the window and thought about her lost loved ones and the irony of finding someone in this world that reminded her of both of them. She sighed and got up to grab her own meals as she was in the mood to finally be back, and place the 3 days' worth of diplomacy work behind her. She had another reason that she preferred to keep to herself at the moment, and for the time being, was concerned with feeding her growling stomach. However, things were not going to be peaceful as she entered the bar and found a band of men accosting Naruto. The genin looked at them and was ready for a fight, while the others were looking very angry. It was surprising to the blonde Hokage, and she couldn't help but wonder what on earth was going on before her. What the heck? Is Naruto picking a fight so early in the morning? It was then that Tsunade noted the bruises and cuts that were bandaged on several of the men, and the way they glared at Naruto meant that the injuries were no doubt caused by someone in the previous night. And when she recalled what the bartender told her of the drunken passengers that had tried to take her away before Naruto came in and stopped them, she realized just who they were, and their threats confirmed it. "You brat, you're the one who gave me this black eye. You're going to pay for every bruise and cut you gave me. The men were furious, but Naruto was even more angry as he replied. You all deserved it. I saw the way you all looked at Tsunade. You bastards had better get out of here before I get very serious. I won't let any of you lay a hand on Tsunade-sama. Tsunade was surprised for several reasons. While Naruto did respect her in his own fashion, this was the first time he addressed her with a tone and title of respect in public. The second was the fact that he was defending her honor and virtue, and while she knew she could take very good care of herself and deal with these cretins, the fact that Naruto stood up for her was very endearing. She quickly got into play and arrived on the scene and spoke sternly to the group of angry passengers. Back off and leave Naruto alone, you idiots. The men looked at Tsunade and merely went back to Naruto, but one of them replied. Later, once we pay this brat back for the beatings, then we'll deal with you, and I a much nicer way too. Naruto however beat that one to it with a powerful left hook to the jaw and sent the man back with a bloody mouth, and his companions were surprised as Naruto looked at them with fury in his eyes, and the feeling of the Kyuubi's chakra began to move into his chakra pathways. The blonde ninja growled as he glared at the men. You stay away from Tsunade-sama, or you're going to wish you were never born. It was then that Tsunade acted as she walked over to a large table made from pure thick oak and with her superhuman strength, crushed it. The sound got the attention of everyone in the room, including the men who were about to attack Naruto. They were shocked at the sight, and Tsunade growled as well. I warn you to back away right now. I won't let you all lay either a hand on me or Naruto, so back off. The men finally got the idea. DN left the area and Tsunade walked over to the bar and handed a large wad of money to the still shocked bartender as she simply replied. This is for the table. I suddenly lost my appetite. Later, Tsunade was nursing a small bottle of sake when she was there at the railings. The captain had been there and was not happy when he caught up with her and wanted to know what the heck had happened to the oak table in his ship. She told him the happenings and left, making the captain really unhappy with the rowdy passengers causing the mess. She heard footsteps and got ready for a fight until she heard the voice. Tsunade Obasan, you alright? Tsunade relaxed as she recognized Naruto quite easily and turned to see the blonde genin before her, and to her surprise, he was carrying a tray filled with food and a fresh bottle of sake as well. She gave the blonde a curious look and asked the question. What's this for Naruto-kun? Naruto gave a slight smile and replied to Tsunade's question. I figured I could thank you by paying for your break fast, Tsunade Obasan, and thanks for helping me out there. Those guys didn't know when to quit and I was worried that I would get myself locked out for disturbing the peace. Not like it was my fault, but I wanted to avoid any more trouble. Tsunade smiled at that and she sat down near a table and bench and make short work of the food and took in the fresh bottle of sake that Naruto had brought. The drink was a bit stronger than the one she had with her at the moment, but she didn't mind at that. She however was happy with the meal and drink that Naruto had given her, and as she ate the food and dumplings there she asked the blonde ninja how he was able to buy the food. And Naruto replied that he had used some of the money Princess Yukie had provided him as a gift, and the blonde ninja wondered why the blonde Hokage seemed to suddenly seem a bit more. He couldn't find the right description at the moment, but he then thought he saw something like jealousy somehow. But the blonde placed that aside and figured that was just wishful thinking. There was nothing that Tsunade would be jealous about anyway. As soon as she finished her food, the two headed back to get some extra shut-eye. When the ship began to shake a little, normal people would have considered the rumbling sounds normal as well as the shaking, but the two were ninja, and when unnatural rumbling and shaking was felt by ninja on a boat, that usually spelled trouble for everyone involved. Tsunade and Naruto realized that there was something wrong as the ship began to move erratically from the side, and it was when they heard a muffled explosion and the shaking of the ship that they realized what was going on, and the telltale smoke that came from the lower section of the ship at the side certainly cemented the situation. Tsunade looked at Naruto and Naruto nodded, and he quickly got what he might need. Whatever was going on was not going to be pretty, and being out in the middle of the ocean on a possibly exploding boat was not good at all. What the hell is going on, Kit? The Kyuubi asked as it stirred in the cage inside Naruto for the moment and wondered just what sort of situation the blonde ninja had gotten the two of them into this time. Was it a battle? The Kyuubi was ever eager for a battle at the moment and needed to blow off some steam and use its energies. However, the demon fox could tell that this situation had nothing to do with battle at the moment, and that made it even more worried. There's some rumbling going on in the ship. something didn't feel right and we're going to have to get ready for anything. Great. The one thing most human sailors fear, and so do seaborne passengers, is possibly happening to us, just what we don't need. Don't worry about that, we're already on the move, so no need to panic just yet. Who said anything about panicking, brat? Naruto went to work and got what he could from their respective rooms and moved out. He had carried the usual bag of ninja tools, including his shuriken and spare kunai, while Tsunade grabbed the supplies of herbal medicines and powders that she made as part of her training as a medical ninja. And they did the right thing, for when they met up with each other, the whole ship suddenly rocked from the side and a loud boom was heard all over the room and smoke began to fill up the area. Naruto and Tsunade didn't need to smell there too deeply to know that there was fire breaking out. Come on, Naruto-kun. Naruto didn't argue as he followed Tsunade, and they were now near the area where the lifeboats were, and they got on as the other passengers and crew got out and began taking whatever they could find to escape. Tsunade and Naruto saw the others get on the boats and they lowered themselves out of the burning boat as another explosion rocked the area, and the two were able to get a fair distance when the final explosion from the boat sent a shockwave that made the two duck and cover in order to avoid the incoming debris. As soon as the dust settled, and the sounds of the ship were gone, Naruto and Tsunade looked up from where they both hid from the debris and the explosion and saw that the ship was now sinking and there was debris everywhere. There were other boats in the area, but they were already moving away from the site. Apparently the two had been sent in another direction and were not seen by the others on the ship. Naruto looked about and saw the debris and saw a large number of containers floating about, along with a fairly intact boat nearby. The blonde genin then was spoken to be the Kyuubi. Better use that water-walking jutsu you learned before and start hauling all those supplies into them boats, we're going to be needing as much as we can get. What about looking for an island? There's no way we can live on boat until we're rescued, you know. There's an island I recall seeing back in my Wandering Days kit, before the Hokage sealed me inside of you. If that place is still there, then you've got a chance. Naruto turned and told Tsunade of what had transpired between him and his resident and what the demon fox had told him. Tsunade frowned a bit. While she had a dislike for the Kyuubi that made Naruto's life miserable in the past, and as long as she had known him, she knew for a fact that the Kyuubi would not let any harm come to Naruto, as it knew that if Naruto were to do, then it would die as well, and the Kyuubi would not relish the idea of dying in a very inglorious fashion, and while it galled her that they would have no other choice but to rely on the Kyuubi, she agreed. Naruto quickly made several kage bushin and they quickly gathered whatever salvageable containers they could find. Thankfully the ship its cargo hold at a better location and it was away from the engine room. Had it been near the engine room when the explosion occurred, the containers would have either split open and shattered, spoiling their contents, or lost at sea, or worse. He and the kage bushin got a number of the boxes on the other boat and off they went, with Naruto managing to find some oars floating about. No doubt they were to be used for the lifeboats. Tsunade felt some pain and looked to see that despite sheltering themselves, there were some splinters on her clothes, and the red coloring told her that she had been cut, and she saw that Naruto had the same injuries as well, though knowing that Kyuubi was with meant that Naruto would only need to have the slivers removed and then the Kyuubi's healing gifts would take over. She decided to wait for a while and hope that the Kyuubi's directions were right, as several large storm clouds were already making their way from the right side. Unless they found the island the Kyuubi spoke of, they were going to be in serious trouble. The lifeboats they were would hold on, but rougher seas would be the death of them both. The sun began to set and it seemed that the island was not going to be seen soon. However, their luck changed as Naruto and Tsunade spot the outline of a mountain and hills in front of them, and after a few more hours of rowing, they finally spot a large island mass before them. There it is. The Kyuubi was right for once. Come on, Naruto, we have to hurry. The two paddled and both Naruto and Tsunade winced a bit at the pinpricks of pain from the splinters they had, and thankfully there were burning hot pieces of metal in them, and that was a good thing for them as they pushed themselves to reach the island, and thankful their luck held out as they were arriving at where the beach was and not at the rocks, as the tides and surf on the rocks and cliffs would have brought them in to be smashed hard by the waves and currents. As soon as they were able to land near the beach, Naruto used his kage bushin to push and pull the boats to the beach, and then the blonde ninja fell to the ground as he dispersed his kage bushin. The blonde Hokage gave a cry and knew that this was what she feared with the overuse of the kage bushin technique. As she used her strength to drag the boats closer to the shore and tied them to a nearby tree with some rope, the blonde Hokage checked on Naruto and found him exhausted, and thankfully there was enough sunlight left her to tend to both her wounds and his. She removed the slivers from both their bodies and she used her healing jutsus to heal the wounds, but not before taking several herbal tonics to counter any possible poisons and bacteria. Tsunade then grabbed as much firewood as she could find and then found a nearby cache of flares and tried them. However, it took a while as most of the flares had been soaked by water and were unable to be ignited. However, she didn't give up and finally found the right flare to use, and they now had a fire, but they had now exhausted their flares and it was too dark to rummage for more flares. Tsunade sat down and grabbed some of the crates and thankfully found some food that she could roast, namely several sides of freshly cut beef hunks, and she did so after spearing them and using the large fires to super cook the food, and the smell of hot cooked beef was enough to wake the blonde ninja and he felt his stomach growl and he looked at Tsunade. Man, that smells great, Tsunade Obasan, can we? Sure. We're going to need all the strength, so dig in, Naruto. Looks like we'll be here for a while, you and I. The blonde nodded and ate the food hungrily, and so did Tsunade as they camped out in the dry areas of the beach for the time being and used some of the trap as makeshift blankets for warmth and protection and used the other traps to cover the sand to make it less itchy and uncomfortable. It was going to be a long day tomorrow. The next day, Naruto opened his eyes and yawned as he looked over the camp and saw that Tsunade was still sleeping on the makeshift beds that they were able to make when they got on the island at the moment. As soon as Tsunade woke up, they managed to eat some of the still fresh and cooked beef, and with their stomachs filled with food, and their wounds no longer giving them trouble, they decided to explore the island. Naruto looked over the island that they were currently in as he and Tsunade moved about to see just where they were. The blonde genin had decided to deploy the Kage Bushin on a recon run of the island to see where they were at the moment, as the pair decided to find themselves some decent shade as the morning sun came on the area. The two saw that the once dark and foreboding island was actually beautiful and had a large number of trees beyond the beach area, and a good number of those trees were coconut trees, and they saw large numbers of coconuts that were all green and healthy. Naruto and Tsunade went there, and Tsunade wasted no time and grabbed one of the trees and bent it down using her superhuman strength, making Naruto sweat drop at the sight of the blonde ninja easily bending the tree down. He had heard from Jiraiya how Tsunade had hefted Gamabunta's massive sword dagger, and that was a testament to her strength along with the ruined landscape he had seen when he, Jiraiya, and Shizune had chased her when she went after Orochimaru and Kabuto, but this was surprising to say the least. The sounds of cracking wood was heard as the tree bent down and break as Tsunade tore down the tree and they got a large number of coconuts. Naruto took out his kunai and he was thankful that he had not lost his kunai and pouch during the evacuation. Thoughts of the incident in the ship that had forced them to abandon the cruise ship pissed him off, but he placed that aside as he needed to place his focus here and now. The blonde ninja used his kunai and his own improved strength to cut open the coconuts and began to cut the tough fibrous coating and then the hard inner shell. Although he made only a small hole to make sure not to ruin the coconut, they got into the water inside the coconut and the two were able to finally assuage their thirst and they felt better. Naruto then used the kunai to scrape out the white coconut meat and handed a good share to Tsunade with the cracked half shell of the coconut acting as a bowl. Tsunade didn't mind the odd look and took the bowl and ate the coconut meat, and the two used the remaining coconuts to drink and eat for the time being. It didn't take long for Naruto to disperse his Kage Bushin and he leaned back in exhaustion on the nearby tree for a minute or two, and Tsunade was near him to help him recover as soon as possible. Like Kakashi and the others, she was well aware of the double-edged sword effect of using Kage Bushin constantly, and that was the fact that while you gained the knowledge and experience of the Kage Bushin, you gained also the exhaustion of the Kage Bushin in the same way, and it would be very taxing on the ninja. Most ninja and even jonin like Kakashi could only create a handful of Kage Bushin as making sure to have enough chakra for the said clones to be made was taxing, and that was why Kakashi limited his use of Kage Bushin. However, due to his natural chakra reserves being very high and the Kyuubi's own chakra supplementing his own, Naruto had more than enough to make as many Kage Bushin as he could, and that was proven with his use of the potentially forbidden Taju Kage Bushin Jutsu. No one has ever used this particular jutsu fully, as even Kakashi and Shizune, the few who would use it wouldn't dare use it unless in the most extreme of situations. This jutsu was Naruto's chosen jutsu of choice for combat due to the Kyuubi and the high chakra he already had been born with. She looked at the now recovering Naruto and he gathered his wits and recovered. his stamina and told her of what his Kage Bushin had found. The island appeared to be rather larger and also was supporting a large number of trees of various types, and there was some hills and even a mountain on the island, something that the two of them had seen the outline of during the night that they came to the island. There were also large numbers of animal tracks, and that told the Hokage that there at least would be good sources of food on the island and more. As soon as Naruto was back on his feet, the two gathered what they could salvage and made their way deeper inland to get their bearings on what this island was. They were able to find a massive waterfall near the interior of the island, and there was a pristine lake there as well as a moving river, and plenty of trees. Wow! This place is really beautiful, right, Tsunade Obasan? Right, but let's not get too excited. We need to find a place to set up camp. We could be here a while, Naruto-kun. Tsunade and Naruto went to work. Tsunade was aware that now was not the right time to be lazy and they would need to hurry and find some place to rest, and the waterfall and lake was certainly a great spot to set up. She then sat down as she still was a bit tired, and Naruto saw that and spoke to Tsunade. You rest for a while, Tsunade Obasan. I'll do some of the work while you rest here in the shade. Naruto quickly left and Tsunade found a nearby tree to rest near but kept herself alert. Just because they were the only people on the island at the moment didn't mean this place didn't have any residents of its own at the moment. The blonde genin moved deeper in the forest, and it was then that he arrived near a large clearing that the Kyuubi spoke. Hold it, Kit. We need to be careful here. What's the problem? You see those scratch marks on that tree over there? Naruto looked and saw a tree with a good portion of its bark torn off as if by a sharp object, and there was a pile of smelly material that he immediately recognized as excrement. The smell was bad and Naruto moved away. Yeesh. That's rank. You're right about that. Those marks look like a tusk made them, and that means there's wild boars out here. Bad news if we get caught out here and they decide to gore us. Yeah. Hold it. Naruto moved quickly as a black and hairy blur came at him, and the blonde ninja quickly leapt up into the air and fired several kunai at the blur and was rewarded with a massive squeal and the sounds of struggling, and sure enough, there before him was a badly injured wild boar. The creature roared and was about to attack the blonde genin as he readied another kunai. It ran towards him, but it suddenly spotted and fell dead before the blonde ninja. Naruto was careful, and when the boar moved, he fired the other kunai and struck the boar right at the heart. As his strength had grown during his time training with Jiraiya, the boar was now officially dead. The blonde walked over and the Kyuubi spoke. Not bad aiming, Kit. I guess all those months training with the pervy sage finally paid off in dividends. We've just found and killed our lunch for today. We've got to eat that. Of course, this is survival, Kit. We either eat or be eaten, and I'd like it better that neither of us wind up in some other creature's stomach. We're going to haul this whole boar back to Tsunade Obasan. Looks pretty heavy and the blood is certainly going to stain me. Like you have a choice, take your kunai and cut out the choicer parts then, namely the ribs, hams, shoulders, and the hind legs, then that will be easier to carry and we can dry and preserve the meat. Leave the rest, nature will take care of that. Naruto sighed and got to work, and in a few hours' time, he was able to have the choicer parts of the dead boar ready for transport. But the Kyuubi had other plans, as the demon fox told Naruto to look for some other things that could help them in the long run, and it didn't take long for the duo to find what they need. Their Kit, see those black rocks there? Naruto looked and saw several black rocks on the ground that had grains in them. Yeah, what about them? That stuff is flint, perfect for making sparks to set up a fire. Take a few with you and we'll get down to cooking the food. You can't eat it raw, you know. I guess. But I need a drink, it's hot and I'm tired. Naruto turned and there was a pool of water nearby, and he whooped and headed for the pool of water, but the Kyuubi quickly spoke to him. Don't you dare drink that water. What? Why the heck not? It's in a pool and it's not moving. That's stagnant water, and stagnant water breeds bacteria, and worse, one drop of that will be dangerous. Will it kill me? Not really, but it will give you really bad diarrhea and more. I can heal the symptoms easily, but you don't need to suffer that in a place like this and with a lot of things to do right. I guess. How bad would drinking that stuff be? Remember that milk you drank which was really past the expiration date when you were younger? Naruto gave a groan at the memory. It gave him a seriously bad stomach for the duration of several hours and really embarrassed him before Sakura and Sasuke at times. That was not one of his most cherished memories, and that made him want to puke more than once. I do. Then imagine having that for the next few hours, and twice as bad, and could last for days as well. I see your point. I guess I can drink when we get back to Tsunade Obasan then. The blonde got the cut meat and left the area. The carcass left for the nature to dispose of for itself, and the blonde returned back to the area and found Tsunade sleeping at the moment. She looked tired, and Naruto wished that none of this ever happened and they were back in Konoha. Sure, the council would have given Tsunade a hard time, but at least she was in familiar territory and not out here. The Kyuubi sensed what was going through the kid's mind and spoke to his container. You can worry about the details later, kid. We need to get a fire going fast, time to look for some fuel and wood, and we'll need to bring in that lifeboat and salvage what we can get. But I can't leave her like this. What would happen if a creature attacked her in her sleep? Then use your cage bushin kit. Some will help you at work, while the others guard the old lady. That sound workable? Naruto smiled and nodded at that. He then used the cage bushin, and out on the field and near Tsunade was now 20 cage bushin next to the original Naruto. The 4 cage bushin formed into a security group to guard Tsunade, while 8 went with Naruto to get supplies and bring the ship into the island, while the others worked on getting firewood and other supplies. Naruto and his cage bushin companions grabbed the boat and thanked that they were able to get some of the floating supplies and used the coils of rope that they had been able to find and lashed them on the boat and then hauled the boat deeper on the beach. As soon as that was done, Naruto took stock of what they had to work with at the moment. There were boxes filled with dry food goods in cans, some extra clothes, spare rope, some bathing supplies such as soap and shampoo, a few boxes holding tools including thankfully a can opener, hammers, pliers, metal wires, and several small bundles of nails as well, some fish hooks that were in storage. Some of the smaller boxes had sewing supplies as well as needles and several balls of thread. Several other boxes had normal supplies of preserved food, along with some ceramic drinking mugs for them, along with metal pots as well, and Naruto was happy that the food boxes were well made and were able to stay dry and unspoiled by seawater. It was then that he spotted a container and opened it, and to his surprise, there was a container full of sake bottles in amazingly still intact ice that smoked out mist, and from what he could smell, only 2 of the bottles were broken, the rest were very much intact. He had a feeling that he should be careful with the sake, as he had a fairly accurate idea on how Tsunade would act the very second she got her hands on the sake. However, he knew that the sake would help keep Tsunade happy for the time being, and he wanted to make sure that Tsunade would be happy. So despite his misgivings on the matter, he took the container out too. As soon as he got back, the cage bushin directed him to a massive pile of rocks and large amounts of mud. The Kyuubi studied everything and smirked. We can make a damn good shelter with these material kit, but for the time being, we'll need some tinder and firewood. The 2 left with some of the cage bushin and gathered all the dry wood that they could find, along with leaves, and then Naruto got down to setting the fire, and with the help of the Kyuubi telling him how to make fire, the blonde now had a large roaring flame, and he then skinned the sections of meat that he had carved off the boar he had killed and began to cook the meat on spits after setting up a large and strong tripod over the fire with some branches. The smell of cooking meat was enough to wake up Tsunade, as Naruto also rested as the cage bushin faded away and Naruto was exhausted. Tsunade walked over to Naruto and sat next to the exhausted blonde. She had seen him rarely in this kind of shape, where he was exhausted and unable to get up, and that was during the first time they met and he had started the bet of completing the Rasengan training in a week's time. She smirked a bit at the memory of that and the amazing results he showed her when the time came for him to use it on that medic nin of Orochimaru, Kabuto. As Naruto opened his eyes, Tsunade gently spoke to him. You all right, Naruto-kun? Yeah, just need a break for a while and then I have to get to work on our shelter for the time being. No, you need to eat and get your strength back. You did a lot of work, now it's my turn. Besides, if I don't do something while we're here to help out, I'd bore myself to death, and that's the kind of thing I would want to avoid. Naruto didn't argue as Tsunade watched over the roasting meat, and as time passed, the smell of well-roasted meat filled the area that they were currently resting in. Naruto recovered, and with the kunai between the two ninja feasted on the well-roasted meat, and Naruto felt his body fully recover, and when he was done eating and getting some cool water to drink, which was pure by the estimation of them of the Kyuubi, he and Tsunade got to work on the shelter. The shelter that Naruto worked on was made with bamboo and pine wood that was plentiful, along with a lower support foundation of stone and held together with mud, rope, metal wires, and vines. The wood was ties together and the stones would support the wood from the wind, and the well-lashed roof of pine needles and coconut palm leaves ensured a snug and dry roof over their heads, with the mud hardening to serve as support and reinforcement. The Kyuubi told Naruto to infuse some chakra into the mud to make not only harden faster but be less water absorbent. They also dug a large and wide trench to sleep in. The results of the hard work were there, as both Hokage and Genin were covered in sweat, mud, and smelled a bit rank from all the work they had done in setting up their shelter along with the camp itself, as they had dragged a log nearby to serve as a sitting area and a fire pit, where they could place dry firewood and tinder, and made a small shelter for the said supplies. They also got in all the supplies they had and also made a similar shelter for them in the same way they made the storage area for the tinder and firewood, with the kage bushin from Naruto and Tsunade as well. The whole effort, which would have taken days, had taken only hours, and that was a good thing, as they could finish the work and take a break. However, both of them were now utterly exhausted and needed to clean themselves up. Naruto then spoke to Tsunade. "You go ahead and take the bath, Tsunade Obasan, I'll stand guard." "Thanks, Naruto-kun, but no peeking." I won't do that. I may be a bit like the pervy sage, but not that much." Tsunade smirked and Naruto blushed as he moved away to let the female Hokage bathe in peace. Tsunade then stripped off her jacket and placed it aside on the rocks, then her sandals. And finally her pants and GI-style top, with those out of the way and revealing that she was not a big fan of undergarments except her panties, which she took off. The blonde Hokage took a dip in the water in one of the nearby pools, which was fed by water from the lake and the moving water, and she found that bathing in the pool was not so bad. It was not too cold for her tastes, and it was all right after all the sweating and effort she and the blonde kid had done. The blonde Hokage sighed as she took the time to finally relax a bit. The blonde knew that as soon as the report came in that they were missing, Shizune would waste no time in mounting a rescue effort for them, and she had faith in Dan's niece that she would pull through. For now she had to take care of herself and help Naruto as well. They had to survive together for the time being until the rescue was organized at the moment. With that, the blonde woman continued with her actions of cleaning off the mud, grime, filth and smell, and despite the fact that she and Naruto were indeed on their own, she found the island rather nice. Meanwhile, Naruto walked about and sat down and decided to rest, but the Kyuubi was having none of it at the moment. "Hey Kit, you need to take a bath. I might not be outside, but even here in your mind, I can tell that you smell." "Give me a break, Kyuubi. Tsunade Obasan is taking a bath. You want me to just jump in there unannounced and get her mad at me? With her strength she'd easily cripple me, and there's no hospital for me to heal in for the time being. She's a legendary medic, Nin, right? She can take care of you apart from me. Provided I don't make her angry." Point taken. Naruto looked at the setting sun, which was soon to vanish under the water, and he sighed a bit. "You know, this place ain't so bad. I always dreamed of being on a deserted island. Of course, I wished I was with Sakura-chan as well, so we'd have some private time and away from all the annoyances. Including the Uchiha brat, I guess. Still, it's nice. Yeah, though you have to admit you are rather lucky to be stuck with one hell of a hot woman, even if she is using henge. I mean, I've seen some very attractive women in my day, and did the deed with a number of them, both human and demoness, mind you, but Tsunade is certainly something. Even if she is old, her age actually makes her quite young by demon standards. Hey, knock it off, you horny fox, and don't you dare hurt Tsunade Obasan. Relax, Kit. You know as well as anyone I can't do anything at the moment without your consent to loosen the seal holding me here in this cage. Besides, I was just testing you. You do like her, right?" "What are you talking about? Look, Kit, I wasn't lying about the good looks. If she looked like that when she was in her mid to late 20s, every normal human male must have dreamed about her. Even if her strength and temper can be a real turn off, but to demons, those qualities are a real turn on. And you do like and respect her, I can tell after all." "I do. She's the one who supported me when I wanted to reach my dreams, though we didn't exactly start off on the right foot." "Hey, you got that right, Kit. You actually had the guts to insult her in the face and threaten to wipe that smirk off with your 2 hands. I have to give you credit for that kind of guts. Perfect for someone who's my container. Anyway, even if it is henge, you have to admit she's hot huh. I guess you're right, but I am not going to do something perverted to her, she'd kill me. The Kyuubi laughed at that and the demon recalled a particular event in its past and replied slyly. Kit, trust me, in a situation like this, it's usually the woman who does the perverted things and not the guy, all it takes is the right circumstances and the right trigger. What's that supposed to mean? You'll see soon enough, besides, if I told you, then where's the fun in that? Kyuubi, now is not the time for jokes, what are you planning? Nothing Kit. Naruto was about to demand some answers from his resident when he heard Tsunade call out to him that it was his turn to take a bath now that she got the night's fire going for him. The thought of finally being able to bathe drove all thought of the Kyuubi's sly hinting out of the blonde's mind for the moment as he hightailed it back to the camp. The blonde saw that Tsunade was already fully dressed and she told him to hurry up and get cleaned for dinner as there was plenty of still tasty meat left, along with some fruit from the cans for them to eat. Naruto wasted no time and headed for the other pool and quickly stripped off his clothes and was now only in his birthday suit and sighed a bit as he gently adapted to the cold water and was now washing off the traces of mud and dirt off his body. As soon as he was done, the two ate their dinner and the food was good, though Naruto naturally wished that he was eating ramen in the Ichiraku ramen stand. He however knew that there was no way for him to have ramen in the middle of a deserted island and that was that at the moment. Tsunade then spoke to him about getting some much-needed sleep and Naruto agreed and they were able to have large amounts of soft leaves to serve as the pillows for the day. They kept the fire going on for the night as they slept. The next day, early morning, Naruto woke up and there was Tsunade sleeping soundly and he could help but admire the blonde woman as she slept. Truth be told, this was the first time he had ever been this close to the Hokage without them shouting at one another and throwing words and even trading a few blows here and there. She looked really attractive when she was like this. Sure, he found her attractive even when angry, but this was the first time he had seen her this beautiful. Naruto tore his gaze away when he felt his body begin to react. What the heck am I thinking? Hey, are you actually thinking something interesting about the blonde Hokage Kit? Shut up Kyuubi. Touchy aren't you? Never mind then. Come on, it's still early and we need to get cracking on food and drink for today. And we need to preserve the preserved food as best we can, time to go hunting. The blonde ninja nodded and gently got out of the bed pit and headed off into the forest to hunt for food and more and with his shuriken and kunai he was more than ready to hunt for food. As the blonde ninja moved out, he arrived in a valley and to his surprise, he spotted several large rabbits and the blonde decided to hunt them and with the directions of the Kyuubi, the blonde was able to kill a good number of the rabbits and the blonde then took the rabbits with him as the Kyuubi directed him to fetch a long pole to tie the rabbits on with some vines. As he did so, the Kyuubi stopped him and directed him to several large bushes and then to some small patches of plants. See those herbs Kit? Yeah, what about them? Those will be helpful in keeping the place fresh smelling. Plus it's non-toxic to humans but is bad news to bugs, just crush them to get to the oils and then place them in a slow-burning flame and you've got a natural insect repellent. Cool. Grab some of those and we'll keep the herbs in mind for longer use, and it's time to learn another trade Kit. What? How to make pottery of course. Come on, time to get cracking on the pots. We'll need those to store the herbs in with some coals from the fire to make the mosquito repellent, but that's for later. Come on, time for break fast. Naruto made it back and began to skin the rabbits as Tsunade was still asleep as the rising sun and the Kyuubi then told him that after skinning the rabbits and roasting them on the fire, he should get down to making a hot bath for himself and the Hokage. And how am I supposed to do that? Simple Kit, find a good number of large stones and heat them in the fire. After a few hours, we send them into a pool to heat the water, though we'll need another fire pit. Come on, time to get to it. Besides, them rabbits will take a while to cook and a good hot soak is perfect for the day. Naruto agreed and with some effort, got a large number of big stones together and then made a large fire in another fire pit and sent the stones into the fire and waited while making his first pot with the nearby clay which was perfect for this sort of thing. It took a while and some failed attempts as well. But Naruto was finally able to make a workable pot with a hold lid to allow the smoke to come out and he then took his pot and gently placed it in the fire where the stones were. He then went to the rabbits and turned them to cook them evenly. A few hours later, after Naruto got out his first ever mud pot and lid, Both were now rock hard from the fire. He took out some branches and carefully removed the rocks and placed them one by one into a pair. Nearby tarps to hold the stones, and as soon as the super hot stones were there and not burning through the cloth, he lifted the pile with the help of 2 cage bushes and then placed the stones into the water by rolling them in gently. The steam coming from the pool showed the heat of the stones, and when he tested the pool, he found the water to be good enough, and he gave sigh as the cage bushin faded and he turned to see that the rabbits were done. And Tsunade was wide awake and smiling at him as she was still on the leaves, and she spoke. "You've been busy, haven't you, Naruto-kun?" Naruto nodded a bit with a smile, and the blonde got out of the shelter and sat near the fire and smelled the newly cooked rabbit meat, and Naruto sat down as well and they began to take their breakfast, and the two were enjoying the food, and Tsunade was surprised that Naruto had made a good hot bath and she decided to try it out, and the blonde ninja was not entirely happy but let her do so. He naturally turned away as she stripped and entered the heated pool, and she sighed contently, making Naruto gulp a bit. He decided to go about and do some more things on the island. "I'll go see what else we can find here, Tsunade Obasan. I'll leave some cage bushin nearby to guard the place." "In a minute, Naruto-kun, can you help me with something?" Naruto was a bit wary and asked what was it that Tsunade wanted him to help her with. "What do you want me to do?" "Join me here for a while and massage my shoulders." The minute he heard that, the blonde genin blushed and turned to face the blonde Hokage and shouted out his shock at her request, which was understandable as what she was asking of him was something he had never expected from the Hokage. "What?" Tsunade turned to face him and gave him a slight glare and spoke evenly. "Don't be so stingy. I helped you when you get badly injured when you train and go on missions as well. It's not like it's a crime for me to ask this of you." Naruto gulped and knew that to be true, and so he did so, partly out of Tsunade's request, and partly out of the desire not to offend her at all, as soon as he was now clad only in nothing at all. He looked down and he blushed as he realized that his COC was already at full mast, but he bit that down as best he could and got into the pool, and despite himself, he sighed at the feeling of the hot water. Tsunade smiled and leaned forward a bit and spoke. "Go ahead, Naruto-kun." Naruto gulped and placed his hands on her shoulders and began to knead and massage her shoulders, and despite not knowing how to actually do it, he couldn't help but hear a content hum from Tsunade, showing him that he was doing it the right way, and it felt nice to know that he was doing the right thing to make Tsunade happy, and that was making him less tense, though the fact that both of them were buck naked, and in a pool of water no less, was making him even more tense. "A bit harder, Naruto-kun." Naruto complied and Tsunade moaned out loud in contentment, and she gave her compliments. "You're doing just fine, Naruto-kun. Who knows, you might become even better at this with some extra practice." "Thanks, I guess." Naruto was feeling hot, and it wasn't due to the hot water which was cooling down either, but from the fact that a section of his perverted brain was seriously reminding him of the fact that he was buck naked in a pool of water with Tsunade. He realized that this was as close as he could get, even closer than Jiraiya when his perverted sensei peeked at Tsunade when she was bathing. The other reason he avoided this was the fact that he was told by Yamato what happened to Jiraiya when Tsunade caught him peeking at her. Tsunade, however, had other thoughts in mind as she relished the sensations of her tension fading and her body getting even more limber. She recalled how Nawaki and later Dan used to massage her shoulders. Her little brother did that to help her relax and at times ask for some change for the usual rock candy he loved in the store, and Dan did it to help her relax after a hard day's work and missions. "It feels good again, and thanks to Naruto-kun, maybe I should pay him back with the same thing." "Naruto-kun, thank you. I think you need to turn your back. I'm going to get out now." Naruto nodded and got up and turned his back and closed his eyes as Tsunade got up and spoke. "Your turn to bathe, Naruto-kun." Naruto nodded, and turned and then went back into the water, but not before Tsunade saw his muscled back and his posterior, making her smirk. The rest of the day went along well as Naruto and Tsunade explored the island, and Naruto went out to hunt for more supplies of food for them to store and use for later. Along the way they found berries and wild fruits to eat and several herbal bushes that could be used to flavor their food supplies, and there were also wild vegetables, and Naruto with the aid of the Kyuubi found more of the wild vegetables and then to his surprise, found beehives. The Kyuubi then told Naruto how to smoke away the bees with a torch that released thick smoke with a mix of plants that had special oils that could release strong odors to drive the bees away, and he got the honey and escaped before the bees came back. He handed the honey to Tsunade and they got to taste wild honey and it was delicious. The two then took the time to relax for a bit before building several signal fires and small shelters to hold spare fuel, tinder, and flint for them to quickly light the fires should they get lucky enough to spot a nearby ship, and with the cage bushin to also keep watch. If ever there would be a ship, they would be able to signal it, as the signal fires had plenty of fuel and were made in such a way that the smoke would be thick and deep white too, as to be easier to spot in the backdrop of the green of the island's tree line and the ocean and sky. When they were done with the signal fires, they went back to their camp and had a lunch with the remaining rabbit meat and several gathered wild vegetables, berries and some fresh fish that Naruto had managed to catch in the river that was leading to the ocean. Once they were full, the Kyuubi then taught Naruto how to make rabbit skin pillows by stripping all the traces of meat and fat left on the rabbit skins and used the needle and thread to make the rabbit skins and filled them with leaves and grass, creating good solid pillows for them to sleep on. The two then slept at night in Naruto's new herbal pot created smoke that was sweet smelling, like peaches, and it worked in keeping away the mosquitoes as well and other bugs, and the two went to sleep. For the next few days, the two got used to the life on the island as they gathered food and supplies and also trained in their free time and got to relax for the time being. For Tsunade, this simple situation was alright, despite her wish to be drinking some sake to make it better and then gamble in order to try her luck, good or bad for that matter. She had to admit that the place was large enough and could be good place for a resort to be built, or a private residence and a pier. This place was not a bad one and could be called a private getaway. And the good news was the fact that she was not being swamped by documents and paperwork that would have made her angry and having headaches. And being with Naruto was actually kind of nice, as she could see how much he had matured to some degree, and despite herself, she couldn't help but admire how much he had grown as well. He used to be short, but now was a lot taller, and no doubt about what she had seen on occasion, had been working out a good deal since being Jiraiya's apprentice. And she could see just why some of the women in Konoha would look at him in a certain way, and the same could be said for Princess Koyuki. She couldn't help but understand the situation, but she felt this burning dislike in her as well. She placed those thoughts aside for the time being and worked on doing what she could to survive while they awaited rescue from Konoha. For Naruto it was rather nice. For the first time since he was there, he was able to relax a bit, and while he wished Sakura was there with them, Tsunade was all right for company, as she was seemingly more relaxed, more than he had seen her be when she took the position of the Hokage. Though being with her was testing his nerves, as he got to see her doing her relaxing and training from time to time, and he had to admit that despite knowing that she was using henge at the moment, he couldn't help but find her very attractive as he gazed at her, and thought on what the Kyuubi had said before, that she looked just like that when she was younger, and he could understand why Jiraiya had once asked her out before. The Kyuubi then taught Naruto, amazing and as ludicrous as it sounded, how to make blankets with the rabbit skins that he had, and it didn't take long for a big one to be made from the rabbits that Naruto had been able to hunt, along with the occasional boars that resided in the island and were a fair distance from them, as they were always on guard, and Naruto even made a bed with rabbit skin for the two of them. The Kyuubi began to teach Naruto how to find the right food and how to boil water for safe drinking when not near a stream. And from time to time they would go swimming and training to keep fit, along with trading stories, and while Naruto made it a point not to ask about her past, he was willing to tell Tsunade of his life when he was still younger and an academy student. It galled her to think he had to endure all that because of the Kyuubi, but she was thankful that it didn't turn Naruto into an angry and hate-filled youth. She shuddered at the thought of him being turned into a monster by the cruel treatment he received as a young boy. It was not long before Tsunade found out about the crate of sake that Naruto found the days before, and she began to drink some of it, and Naruto knew that things were going to be a bit harder this time around. Only he had no idea what was about to happen on the soon-to-come night. In the camp, Naruto had arrived in the camp and had eaten some food when Tsunade was there sitting down on the ground, and she was drunk on a number of bottles of the cold sake, as the empty bottles were there at the moment, but thankfully was resting nearby and seemed to be in the mood for some decent sleep. He was about to help her to the bed and managed to get her to her feet and then help take her to the shelter when Tsunade looked up and smiled at him. She then spoke to him in a rather soft voice. "Naruto-kun, can you look at me?" "Yes." Naruto looked at Tsunade and he had to admit the view was nice, and ironically enough, Despite his best intentions, he found his gaze being drawn to her white skin, which was being given a very healthy glow by the firelight, and he felt his gaze go lower. The sound of Tsunade laughing made him stop his wandering before Tsunade spoke. You think I'm attractive, Naruto-kun? Yes you are. Even if it's just henge. Naruto didn't know what to say, as he knew that if he said something wrong, he might get more than a whack on the head, and he decided to tell the truth. You look attractive even in henge. Tsunade grinned at that and then spoke. Good answer. Now here's the reward. Before Naruto could figure out just what Tsunade was driving at, he got his answer when he was grabbed by the blonde Hokage and then was kissed in a very possessive way, and it shocked him to the core. He had never been kissed before by a woman and it was making him feel very heated. Even the imagined kiss he would have with Sakura didn't have this level of intimacy and power in it. The kiss lasted for a minute, but to Naruto it felt like forever, and he gently responded, and Tsunade moaned out loud and loosened her grip, and with a gentle push, sent Naruto landing in the bed of the shelter. Naruto had no idea what he was going to do as Tsunade looked at him with a very hungry eye. The way the blonde Hokage was walking up to him was sending danger signals all over his brain. His first instinct was to run, but somehow he couldn't summon the will to move his body. He thought of fighting off Tsunade's advances, but knew that the idea was worthless, no matter how skilled he had become. And how much he had grown physically, there was no chance at all that he could match Tsunade's superhuman strength with his own, and knowing that a single blow from her could cripple or kill certainly made that idea of fighting her off even more difficult. And besides, he couldn't bring himself to dare hurt Tsunade no matter how desperate he was. She was among the few people he cared about. Even more so since she told him to grow up to be a good man so he would properly inherit the position of Hokage when he was ready. She seemed to show support for him many times over, and he had recently learned of her defense of him from the council who wanted to limit his missions. Tsunade was not in the mood to be denied as she slowly removed the sash that held her kimono top on her, and she smiled wickedly as she moved ever closer to the blonde who was resting on the bed that he had fashioned from the earth and covered with soft leaves and rabbit skins, and she was very much eager. Naruto gulped and spoke out, hoping that maybe he could talk Tsunade out of what she was about to do to him. One part of him, aided by the Kyuubi in some fashion, wanted to let her do what she wanted, while the other part told him to stop this whole situation before it got totally out of hand at the moment. Tsunade Obasan, wait, what's wrong, Naruto-kun? You're drunk, Tsunade Obasan, you need to get some sleep. I will, Naruto-kun, but before I do, I have every intention to have fun with you. Naruto gulped as despite being a virgin, he had a fairly accurate idea on what kind of fun Tsunade had in mind. Tsunade Obasan, you're. Tsunade gave him a sly look and took off her jacket, swayed her hips gently from side to side, making Naruto the more aware of her actions, and she grinned at his fierce blush. She might be drunk, but she was certainly going to enjoy every second of this. The blonde Hokage then removed her sandals despite being drunk, and she then moved in towards Naruto. As she then was very close to him, and she replied, "You know, I saw the looks Princess Koyuki gave you. What? She liked you a lot, Naruto-kun. Did you kiss her?" No, I mean. What? Well, actually she kissed me, while I was in the hospital recovering. I see. Well then, I feel it's my turn. What? I saw she liked you and you liked looking at her, and I was not happy with it. What are MMMPPPHHHHH? Naruto had no time to react when Tsunade suddenly grabbed him by the head and brought him to her lips and ravenously kissed him. The shock of it all surprised Naruto, and before he could try to escape, Tsunade hugged him in an iron-hard grip, and with his arms pinned to his sides, there was no way he could escape or push her away. Added to that was the fact she was now straddling him and he was unable to move. Tsunade kissed him deeply, and as soon as she was done she looked at Naruto and spoke in a very husky tone. I didn't like it, because I wanted you to look at me. Naruto was naturally confused by that statement, and Tsunade replied, I wanted you to look at me because I want you. Tsunade Obasan, please, don't. Why, Naruto? Am I too old for you? Tsunade then leaned forward and kissed him once more, and then before Naruto could say anything, she removed her GI top and revealed her upper naked form to Naruto, and the blonde genin felt his heart stop at the sight before him, as the undeniably beautiful woman before him smiled at his reaction as he was blushing bright red. She then leaned forward once more and kissed Naruto on both cheeks and whispered, I used to think that I saw in you the two people I loved, but I want you for you, Naruto-kun, and I want you, now. Naruto tried to say something to halt Tsunade as he knew that it was just the sake talking. And not the real Tsunade, but his reasoning was not doing anything to convince him as Tsunade moved back and removed his outer jacket and then his black shirt and Naruto was now half naked as she was in. With the necklace there, it made it all the more interesting to see him like this at the moment. He tried to beg her to stop but Tsunade was not deterred by his actions as she began to kiss his chest and then ran her hands on his chest and stomach and it made him gasp as sensations of pleasure began to overwhelm his reasoning at the very moment and he was about to give in, when Tsunade leaned on him and held him close, and fell asleep. Apparently the sake she drank was potent enough to make her fall asleep. And Naruto had no idea what to do, but slowly move away and try to make sense of what he would do now. The next day, Tsunade woke up with a pounding headache as she opened her eyes and wondered just what had happened last night that made her feel very tired. She then realized that her top was gone and when she saw the sake bottle nearby and the fact that she was half naked, she realized what had happened and her memories came right back at her, and she was shocked at what she had done to Naruto. She quickly looked about and she was worried. Naruto. The blonde Hokage quickly got herself dressed and left the camp and tried to look for her companion on the island and she was relieved that Naruto was actually there on the beach and he was apparently fishing and she walked over towards him and was happy that he didn't try anything foolish. Naruto-kun, are you alright? The blonde genin turned and gave her a smile. I'm fine Tsunade Obasan, just woke up early decided to catch us some fish for breakfast and look, I found some bird eggs too. Tsunade turned and there in a small pouch which had a number of eggs in it. She looked at Naruto and touched his shoulder. But Naruto decided to move on and bring the catches he already made and spoke to Tsunade. I've got to get back to camp Tsunade Obasan, I have to cook the food so we can get down to the other matters. Naruto smiled at Tsunade and moved away, but his attempts to make it seem that he was past the whole incident from last night were not working the way he expected as Tsunade looked at his retreating form with sad eyes. She knew that what she had done had made him wary of her and it was something that made her feel a lot more isolated. For the next few days, the two continued on with what they normally started, gathering food and drink, surviving and waiting for any sign of rescue, as they knew that going out on a raft was a bad idea and could very well invite a bad situation. All the while Naruto still tried to keep out of his mind what happened and was wary of Tsunade for the time being and Tsunade seemed to forget the incident as well, but he was not so sure at that as he would warily watch her if she got near the crate full of sake at the moment but she seemed to stay away from it for the time being. The Kyuubi then spoke to him on the 10th day since they were stranded. You might want to tell me why you're acting as if she's going to ravish you again Kit. You saw what happened. She got drunk on sake and nearly raped me. You're angry aren't you? A little, but I can't blame her too much. You're lying Kit, you thought she would violate you right? Maybe, but she said to me that she wanted me, and for a moment I felt that she did, but for all I know, it was just the sake talking. No way would Tsunade Obasan want to do that with a kid like me. In case it escaped your attention Kit, you're not exactly a kid anymore, besides, you might be 15 but since you're a ninja, you're already an adult by ninja law. I know that. Let me tell you something about alcohol Kit, it might make people drunk and make them act unlike themselves. It's not making them lie though. What are you saying? Sake, like any normal alcoholic drink lowers inhibitions and makes people more relaxed and while it messes their perceptions to some degree, it also makes them say and do things that they normally would not do or say due to circumstances. I was sensing Tsunade's intentions a few days ago, and she might have been drunk, but she was not lying, she wants you, badly if I might add. Are you lying to me Kyuubi? In this matter, no I'm not, she wants you Kit, she just never shows it often since she knows it might look bad on the outside to others and to you. Besides, if you didn't notice, she stayed away from the sake for days, and that tells me she regrets what happened, if she didn't she would have gone right back to the bottle right? I guess. Look Kit, I'm no stickler for romance honestly, but you have to admit that there's something going on here between you and her. Besides, you have to be honest about the fact that for the past 10 days, you've been looking at her in a very different way, and I'm also talking about that night. Naruto knew that to be true. Ever since that incident he began to see Tsunade in a far different light, though he wondered why at times he thought about the female Hokage in that fashion. He felt like he was very attracted to her and not just for her beauty despite it being henge. I don't know. You will eventually kit, and I can bet the result will surprise you a great deal. But what about that girl Sakura? Well, I can't answer that, though to be honest, you two are better off as friends and teammates for the time being in my opinion, and you've been thinking less of her in a romantic way after all, right? Naruto had to agree with that. For the past few days, his normal dreams of Sakura and him together were becoming less frequent and they seemed to be replaced by other images and thoughts, but to his shock, the images and thoughts were now being directed towards another person, and that person was none other than Tsunade, and it made him even more confused on his stand with the Hokage. I can't be thinking about Tsunade Obasan that way, Kyuubi. Why? Is there a law that forbids a young man from being attracted to an older woman? Because as far as I know there's no such law anywhere just yet, and I can tell you that you aren't the first guy in this mortal world to fall in love with an older woman, and you won't be the last either. Alright, I'm attracted towards her and she is gorgeous, henge or not, but what about her? Why don't you find out? And how do I do that? Don't ask me for every answer, figure this one out on your own the same way you learned the Rasengan. Naruto sighed at that as he returned to the camp as it was going to be dinner time soon. Back in Konoha at the moment, Shizune sighed as she looked at the latest reports from the rescue groups. The medical nin and John, an apprentice to Tsunade, was having a hard time making sure to keep the village running at the moment, and she hoped for good news soon. At the moment the Konoha ninja were sending out the ninja that they could afford to send out to organize a search party for the Hokage and the blonde genin who was her escort at the moment. She looked out at the windows and wondered if any news would be coming in for her. It was then that a knock on the door was heard and in walked Genma with his senbon in his mouth as usual. The medic nin turned to the former Chunin exam proctor before the sound and sand attack on Konoha. Any news? Nothing yet. The rescue teams have been able to contract some help in searching the area where the ship had sunk. Sakura is leading the whole operation at the moment. Shizune smiled at that as she knew Sakura would not let any harm come to Naruto and she would do whatever it took to locate her teammate. Along with her was Sai and Yamato, along with Kakashi. The group led the rescue efforts along with several of the other Konoha ninja groups in order to locate Tsunade and Naruto, and she knew that with them about, sooner or later, Naruto and Tsunade-sama would be found by them. The only thing she hoped for was that both were still alive and safe. She hoped that the two had not gone and done something drastic in order to stay alive until they were found. She knew that Tsunade cared deeply for Naruto as he reminded her of the most important people in her younger life and how much their dreams meant to them and her, which was why she consented to be Hokage. And she knew that despite his attitudes at times, Naruto did care for Tsunade, though in a rather unorthodox fashion. She then turned her attention to the next pile of paperwork and she wondered just how things would turn out the very moment Tsunade would return to face another mountain of all this work. Shizune had no idea just what was happening at this very moment. In the camp, Tsunade looked at the flames of the campfire Naruto made before he left to get some more berries for a light late dinner snack for the two of them, but she was not in the mood for berries, and when she looked at the camp, she spotted the crate that had some of the sake that Naruto salvaged a few days before, but she looked away from the sake. Unwilling to let her desire for a good drink cloud her judgment like before, she recalled just how her last drinking run had brought her to this state of mind. The blonde Hokage still recalled the cautious and wary looks Naruto placed towards her from time to time when she eyed the sake crate, and she couldn't blame her companion for being wary towards her. After all, in her drunken state she had nearly deflowered him. Tsunade quickly hit a nearby stone and the stone cracked with the impact, and she looked back into the fire and began to think out loud to herself. I can't believe I did that to him. She couldn't help but feel angry and disgusted with herself as her memories of that night several days ago come back, along with the results of the day after. She recalled that while Naruto had been his usual self, there was an air of wariness in him since that day, and while they didn't get into a loud argument about last night, she could tell that what she did had no doubt scared Naruto. She couldn't blame the teen for being frightened of her when she was drunk. There were few people who could tolerate her when she got drunk, Jiraiya being one of them, along with Shizune, Sarutobi, and Dan. She didn't have the heavy tolerance like other heavy drinkers, but she could stomach a lot of sake in one setting, and she had indulged herself that night when she made her moves on the blonde ninja. She knew Naruto didn't have the pure physical strength she had with her for the past years due to her exceptional chakra control, and there would have been no way for him to fight her. And she knew that despite their arguments and their first meeting, Naruto would not dare attack her in any physical fashion, and that made the memories all the more painful. She had overpowered him and nearly raped him in her drunken state, and with her abilities there would have been nothing he could have done to stop her. She did recall, despite being drunk, the pleas he made to her to stop and think about what she was doing, and she recalled her ignoring them and giving him a kiss on the mouth and then stripping off her top right in front of him. She forced him to touch her body and she continued to kiss him, and she recalled saying that she wished. "I can't believe I said that to him, I wanted him. I was so stupid." However, there was a part of her mind that thought otherwise, and it was now making itself known to her at this very moment. "No, you do want him. You've been close to him for all this time and he is handsome." "No, I can't think of him like that." "Why?" "Because he reminds me of my little brother and what I did was wrong." "Are you sure? You love him, but not as Naoki or as Dan, not anymore." It was true. She knew that to be utterly true as she thought about how much Naruto had grown up over the years he had been away from Konoha, and he had matured a good deal, though still retaining some of his older traits. He was reminding her of her first love, Dan, more and more each day, and while that would have sounded nice to some ordinary people, her drunken actions a few days ago made her aware that she was not seeing her little brother in Naruto all that much anymore, and not as Dan either. And there was more. Naruto was so like his father. She had seen the Yondaime Hokage and she had never told anyone this, not even Jiraiya, but before she left the village, Kushina and Namikaze managed to convince her to help give birth to Naruto. She did so, and when Naruto was born, she was there to see his birth and the death of both his parents and the sealing of the Kyuubi inside of him. After that she left and vowed never to think of it. There was a part of her that reminded her of the disservice she had done on Naruto's father all those years before, so she couldn't entirely blame him for his angry words when they first met. Naruto was very attractive, and certainly it would not be surprising that she was attracted to him like any normal woman, but she was not any normal woman. She was the only female Hokage in the world. The idea of someone as old as her being attracted to a boy who was by all accounts much younger than her was wrong in many ways, but she couldn't deny it. She loved Naruto, and not as Naoki anymore, and of Dan, but for him. He reminded me of Dan and Naoki, but now I do love him, for himself, but I can't. Why? Because after what I did, he's terrified of me and angry as well. I can't blame him. There's no way he could fight me. And I think that he would never want anything to do with an old woman like me. Even if I admit that I love him now, I ruined any chance to make up to him by being so damn drunk. And I nearly raped him for Kami's sake. What kind of young man would want a woman who does that to him? Even if I said I loved him now, he would think of me as a liar. I'm so sorry, Naruto-kun. Tsunade then sighed a bit as she finally let that out of her system and just looked at the flames, hoping to get sleepy enough and get through the coming day, despite the ache in her heart. Unknown to Tsunade, Naruto had returned earlier and had taken another route into the camp and heard the entire confession that Tsunade let out from her inner self, and he couldn't help but be surprised at how much Tsunade had said. He thought about the times they would argue about him leaving and looking for Sasuke, and when he learned about the Wind Rasengan and managed to master a portion of it at the moment. She wanted him to make it forbidden and limit his use for it, and because she cared for him, and to hear that she loved him was enough to make him feel something. She loves me. Naruto then knew that she did care for him, and she was very sad about what she had done, and according to the Kyuubi, sake or any alcoholic drink had a way of making humans say things that they either lied about or really felt inside, and the Kyuubi told him that while Tsunade was indeed drunk those days before, she was telling the truth, and that hit him like a punch to the guts. And he saw that his avoidance had hurt her more than any amount of physical pain. He realized that for the past few days had made her feel that he hated her. He could never hate her, not after all the things he learned, and he decided on the right course of action. He knew that this was what Tsunade wanted in truth, and while he had hoped to do this with Sakura previously, the blonde felt that this was a better move, and after all, he did love her in his own way. Now was the time to prove it. Lemon time. Tsunade looked at Naruto as the blonde ninja came closer to her and did something she never thought he would do at all. He moved forward and kissed her right on the lips gently, in a way that got her attention right off the bat. The kiss was brief, not really a full kiss in most senses, just a simple brush of the lips, but the sensations were enough to nearly floor the Hokage, so much so that she was amazed that she was still able to stand still. As Naruto backed away, Tsunade looked at him with a shocked expression as she had not expected that at all from the blonde teen. Naruto-kun, what? Thank you. What? Thank you for being there and being supportive of me, all this time Tsunade Obasan. Normally she would have slugged him for calling her that, but she was still reeling from the emotions that flooded her when Naruto had kissed her gently. Tsunade managed to recover a bit and she spoke to Naruto as Naruto looked at her with warm eyes. She didn't deserve that warm look and those feelings she had in her. After all, she had let her drinking get her to do something, immoral to him. If anyone found out how she had nearly raped Naruto in a drunken state, it would be a disaster. Even her normally defiant nature was gone at the thought of what she had done in a drunken stupor to Naruto, the one boy she had a soft spot for. It was very disgusting for anyone to do, especially considering their age difference. Naruto-kun, I'm sorry about before. I guess I was just stressed out and I was drunk after all and. Naruto shook his head and knew that now was the right time. He had known about Tsunade's loss from Shizune long ago when he had called her heartless and an old hag when they first met all those years ago. Over the months he had known her and coming back after many years, he had come to consider her a very important person in his life. She was after all the granddaughter of the first Hokage and she willingly gave the necklace she treasured to him and considered him a worthy Hokage. And that fact made him very happy, and he admitted that he liked it when she got angry, not in the physical way when she would hit a person, but when she was making that angry face. He didn't know if he was being dense or being so used to pain, but he found her fiery expression and the hard look in her eyes utterly attractive. He naturally kept that to himself as he didn't want her to think the wrong thing if that came out. But now, after hearing her confession secretly, he knew that now was the right time to tell her his own feelings. You have nothing to be sorry about, Tsunade Obasan. I don't have any anger towards you. Tsunade knew that Naruto was an honest young man and never the one to lie, and even if he did lie, he was inherently terrible liar, so his lies were flimsy, but she still couldn't believe he didn't hate her for what had happened only a few days before. He carried on working and doing the needed things to keep them alive on this island, but after what she had done he thought he would be angry at her at how she had nearly molested and raped him. It still made her sick at how low she had acted towards him. I do have something to be sorry about. I shouldn't have done those things to you. I was weak. Naruto shook his head and replied. You're not weak, Tsunade Obasan, and even if you were sober then, I doubt I could stop you. Tsunade felt so vulnerable at this moment and she didn't like this feeling at all, and she tried to get back to her older self and looked at Naruto and was about to speak to him. But Naruto beat her to it as he smiled at her. Tsunade Obasan, I heard you talking to yourself earlier, and I heard something that I want to know if it is true. You said you loved me, right? Tsunade didn't want to admit it. She wanted to say that it was just the sake that did the talking that night, that her drunken nature at that night made her say things that she didn't mean, but the fact that they were alone on this island and that he had heard it all made her realize that there would be no hiding it from him at the moment, and she didn't want to hurt him either. And it was true, she did love him, and not in the way that she had once when she saw him as her deceased brother Naoki, or Dan. She was not foolish enough to not see how handsome Naruto was and how much of a good man he was. But she knew that there would be no way there would be any true future between her and Naruto. Maybe if she had been born a few years earlier than before, there would have been a chance, no matter how slim between them, but the truth was painful and she wanted it over and done with so things could move on. I do love you, and not like a little brother or my former fiancé, but more than that, but we can't. Naruto smiled even more as he knew that it was enough. Besides, he had something to tell Tsunade as well. He took that to the fore and replied, I love you too. Whatever Tsunade was planning to say died in her throat as she looked wide-eyed at the blonde ninja before her, the one she felt sad for when people glared at him with hatred due to his resident inside of him, and the one she cared for apart from the village and the people that she as Hokage had vowed to protect from harm. She couldn't have heard that right. There was no way that Naruto meant that, he couldn't have. Naruto, you can't mean that. Naruto looked at her seriously and replied in a solid tone. Why not Tsunade Obasan? I mean it. I do love you. You can't. No, this is wrong. Why? It's just wrong. You're only 15 and I'm already 53. I seem to recall not a single law in Konoha that did say anything about it being wrong to be attracted to an older woman. And I can bet I'm not the first young man to see an older woman and see her as attractive, and I won't be the last. Besides, there's no law that forbids love after all. Tsunade tried desperately to think of a way out, but her words died as Naruto gave her a loving look, and moved closer until he was so close to her. Naruto then kissed her again gently and reached out to hold her. She tried to move away from him. Despite the fact she had more than enough power to knock Naruto aside, she didn't. Her emotions were in disarray, and the way Naruto was holding her, like a lover, was making her lose her will to fight, but not completely, as she moved back and tried to stop it. No, I'm too old for you, and this is. I know you're really old, Tsunade Obasan, but I don't care. I do love you even if this is merely henge before me. You are beautiful to me. And I promise you that I will never breathe a word of this to anyone else. This is between you and me. How can I be sure you won't? Naruto looked at Tsunade and replied honestly. I won't hurt you. I could never hurt you. I mean it, and I am going to prove to you, here and now, how much I love you, but only if you let me. Tsunade watched Naruto back away from her, showing that he meant those words, and she couldn't help but feel completely vulnerable now, and she knew why. This was a critical time between the two of them. On one hand, she could say no now and Naruto would leave her be, but she would no doubt hurt him by doing so and drive an invisible wedge between them. On the other hand, she could allow it and allow him to show her how much he loved her and admit to her own feelings. She looked at Naruto, who stood there, waiting patiently for her response, and she gave it, by nodding gently and replying. Go ahead, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled and walked towards Tsunade, and with an amazing gentleness that belied his natural strength and ability, he removed her jacket and then kissed Tsunade gently once more, and then reached for the belt that held her top together and loosened it and placed it aside, and he then parted her top and revealed Tsunade's upper form to him as he moved away her upper dress. The blonde Hokage couldn't help but blush bright red, as this was the very first time she had ever been naked in front of a man. She was worried greatly, as she hoped that even though it was just henge, that Naruto approved of her appearance. Naruto noted that and kissed Tsunade once more, but with greater passion and desire with his movements, and he then moved his tongue on her lips, and with some gentle prodding, Tsunade responded and opened her mouth, and Naruto did not hesitate as he plunged his tongue into her mouth, and the result was very much entrancing to Tsunade, as she moaned out loud in pleasure and desire and responded slowly, trying to get back into doing this with a man, as it had been so many years since she had done this, and though it has been a while, she remembered it well, and to her surprise it seemed that Naruto was also learning fast. Well, I guess that since he learned the Rasengan in 1 week means he can learn anything. Naruto moved back and smiled at Tsunade as he looked at her half-naked form and then touched her breast gently, and then Tsunade couldn't help but grit her teeth at the shivers of pleasure that made their way up her body. She felt like she couldn't handle it anymore, and Naruto noted that and stopped and spoke. You want to sit down? Tsunade nodded, and Naruto guided her to sit nearby a log in their camp, which was where they would sit to eat their food, and then he kneeled down and removed Tsunade's sandals with a gentle manner, and then with a nod from the still blushing woman, he removed her pants and then saw her panties, which to his amusement was deep black, and he whistled wolfishly at Tsunade. Wow, who knew? Tsunade gave a glare at him and replied. You breathe a word of this to anyone. I won't. You look beautiful, Tsunade-chan. Tsunade gasped as she heard the endearment, and she could tell that Naruto meant it, and she blushed despite herself as Naruto then removed his own clothes, allowing her to see him as well. He removed his orange and black jacket, then his white shirt, and then his pants, revealing his rock-hard and grown-up form to her roving eyes once more, showing his toned form and the muscles that were there through the training given to him by Jiraiya. She gave a warm blush at that and then couldn't help herself as she looked at his boxers, the very same green with fox heads on it, but her laughter died down as she saw the tent in his boxers as his SX was hard and erect. She blushed at that, and Naruto smiled in SXUAL mischief at that, and to tease her a bit more, he asked the question. Like what you see, Tsunade-chan? Tsunade blushed and glared back gently and decided that she had been too passive for too long, and she stood up and replied. I do. Now, do you like what you see? Naruto didn't hesitate and replied. Oh, definitely. Good. In Naruto's mind, the Kyuubi was also in agreement, and it chuckled at the sight before it. Damn, this will be great. Maybe I can make these two love birds even happier. Tsunade then moved forward and kissed Naruto. Both of them pressed their nearly naked bodies to one another and both moaned at that as Naruto gently moved Tsunade towards the bed that he had made before, and thankfully covered with leaves and then soft rabbit skins. When they got there, he gently leaned forward and allowed Tsunade sit down on their bed, and then he moved back and touched her breast once more, and Tsunade moaned out her pleasure at that, and it made Naruto happy to see Tsunade in pleasure like that. It was very rewarding in his mind as he tried to recall how to touch her breast, and this time, he wanted to do that, and this time, she was not forcing, and that was a good thing. He had learned how to do this from a few of the pervy sage's novels, and while he ignored the antics the old sage would pull back then in his training journeys with him, he was not that close-minded to what the pervy sage taught him about being intimate with women. Jiraiya explained to him that he was already at the age to learn those things, and he took it upon himself to teach him on the road, and despite his protests, the pervy sage went at it anyway, so he decided to just go with the situation and see how it would develop. And for the very first time, he was glad that he decided to pay attention to the white-haired pervert for once. The blonde ninja listened intently to Tsunade's moans as he used them to gauge his actions, and the way Tsunade responded told him that he was on the right track as he continued to caress her large breasts. In truth, he was rather attracted to them and to her in some ways, but he had only been able to face the truth recently that he loved Tsunade. He was not dense enough to forget their age difference. But he didn't care about that at all. Here on this island he finally got to see how much Tsunade cared for him, and now was the time to pay her back for being there and supporting him, even if their relationship wasn't always on easy terms. Tsunade was getting drunk, and not on sake, but on pleasure and desire. It had been so long since she had ever been touched in such a delicious and wonderful way that she couldn't help but be utterly entranced by it all. I miss this. It's been so long since I had been with anyone. Naruto-kun, more. Please, I want more. Naruto apparently could sense the desire burning in Tsunade as he leaned forward and kissed her deeply, and she fervently responded to that action with her own tongue pushing its way to his mouth, which he willingly opened, and Tsunade didn't hesitate at all as she tasted him and ran her tongue into his mouth and dueled with his own, making the two of them moan at the very same time. Tsunade was ravenous in her tasting of Naruto's mouth, and she was barely able to restrain herself as she recalled how things turned out when she went overboard in a drunken state. This time, she was sober, and no matter how taxing it was on her nerves, she was going to go slowly to savor this moment and make it nice for Naruto as well. Tsunade was in charge of many things in her younger years, and her love life was one of the things she was in charge of, but in the moment, she was content to let Naruto take the lead for the time being. She wanted to feel a man's passion, lust, love, and desire for her. At this point, she didn't care about their age difference anymore. The only thing she wanted to think about was how wonderful it was to finally feel pleasure and desire from sexual and romantic contact with a man. As they parted with their kiss, Naruto looked at Tsunade's deep brown eyes, which were sparkling with desire, and he smiled warmly and blushed as he reached for her large and firm breasts and touched them again, and he was amazed at how soft and how firm her breasts were, and when he ran his fingers on her nipples, and Tsunade moaned out her pleasure as she recalled how sensitive her breasts were to touch, and the many years she spent not being with a man further increased the sensations of pleasure. Oh yes, right there, Naruto-kun. Naruto then cupped her breasts, and then he moved forward, and Tsunade leaned back in compliance with Naruto's actions, and she gasped as she suddenly saw Naruto open his mouth and take in her right breast and her nip. She hissed loudly as she felt Naruto begin to lick and suckle on her nip and breast while cradling her. She sensed how much Naruto enjoyed this as she felt his cock touch her thighs, and her lover's say was hard and hot, and that made her feel even more aroused by the sensations as well. Naruto then laid attention to her other breasts while caressing the other still with his hands. Naruto had to admit that maybe Jiraiya's teachings on being with the opposite sex was not that bad at least, but he was learning just how to pleasure Tsunade well on his own terms at least, but doing certain motions and listening to how many times Tsunade would moan and shout in pleasure, then he would be able to know how well he was currently doing at the moment. As for him, He felt utter desire as he continued with his actions on the Hokage's Brius, and the way she moaned out her desire made this situation all the more interesting for him. Tsunade felt like she was in heaven as she felt Naruto continue his actions on her Brius, as he was now moving between her left and right Brius, doing things evenly in order to make the pleasure even more intoxicating for the blonde female Hokage. At times, with Naruto's gentle but strong licking, suckling, and nipping, she felt like he wanted to take her into himself whole, and the pleasure made her swoon. Ah yes, Naruto-kun, that's good. Naruto then moved away from her Brius, and Tsunade then took the initiative and moved her body forward and kissed Naruto once more, and then she made her own move as she reached out for him and began to kiss and lick Naruto's body, starting from his face to his neck and then to his broad and well-formed chest, making the blonde ninja moan out in his own desire and pleasure, making her feel even more happy as she realized that despite the years, she still had what it took to attract a man and make him moan and squirm at a touch. It made her feel even more happy that unlike the last time when she was drunk, Naruto was responding favorably to her actions this time, and that was a good thing. She continued with her actions and then reached the toned stomach of the blonde genin and saw the spiral seal that held the Kyuubi at bay, and instead of being frightened by the sight, she kissed it gently, making Naruto gasp in pleasure and surprise at her actions, and that made her smile as she removed his boxers, and it was now that she finally reached her target, and she stared at Naruto's sei for a while. She had to admit that it had been quite a while once more when she had looked at one so closely and marveled at the length, thickness and hardness of Naruto's COC, and thought it over that the Kyuubi had managed to influence the blonde genin in more ways than just the whisker marks on his face. He was of a very good size for a young man his age, and he was still growing as well. He's already 10 inches at this young age. Wow, the Kyuubi was helpful here at least. Tsunade licked her lips and then looked at Naruto, who was looking at her with wide eyes at the moment, and she smiled sensually and spoke. Now it's my turn, Naruto-kun. Tsunade kept true to her word and began to run her hands gently on Naruto's sei and felt the hot length and the smooth warm skin, and then she touched the soft spongy head of her lover's sei and she smiled warmly to herself and then to Naruto. It's been a very long time since I've done this. I hope I can still do this right. Tsunade relaxed herself and moved forward and licked Naruto's COC by the shaft, and the moment Naruto moaned out in pleasure at the sensations and feelings, she was pleased, even more so when Naruto moaned out her name in a very aroused fashion. Tsunade-chan, that was. The way Naruto acted and moved told the aroused Hokage that this was the absolute first time anyone had ever done this to him, and to know that made her heart beat even faster. And made her feel hotter. She knew that in this way, when dealing with women, Naruto was an utter virgin, and the fact that she was about to take his virginity and in the right way of mutual love and passion made her lose the last of her inhibitions, and she licked his COC from base to tip, and she would gently nip and suckle on Naruto's testicles, mindful not to hurt her lover too much, and Naruto's pleasure shouts told her that her actions were doing what she hoped they would do at the moment, and she continued until Naruto was shouting her name in pleasure, but she was going to make him scream out loud as she reached the tip, and with several licks she opened her mouth and took in Naruto's full length into her mouth, and the moment she took in Naruto's length, the blonde screamed out her name. Tsunade-chan. Tsunade blushed brightly as she slowly took in Naruto's hot and hard length slowly as to get used to the sensations once more. It had been a while since she had done this, and she recalled that Dan had the very same reaction when they did this during their younger days, and when they were dating, she placed those memories aside and focused on making Naruto more into the pleasure, and as soon as she took in his length to the point he touched her throat, she relaxed, fighting the gag reflex, and then she was assured that she was ready. She began to move her head up and down, careful not to scrape her teeth on Naruto's COC. She and Dan knew about how painful and uncomfortable that might be on a person, though she knew that there were some guys that liked pain, but Naruto was not one of them, and he had more than enough pain to deal with, and now she planned to help him lose as much of that said pain as best she could. Naruto looked at Tsunade as she moved her head up and down with his COC in her mouth and working her magic on him as she licked and sussed on his sei, and the mage of the undeniably attractive blonde Hokage doing this to him was driving him wild and was forever embedded in his brain. He reached out and touched Tsunade's head and gently played with her blonde hair and her scalp, and he moaned in greater pleasure. Tsunade-chan, that's so good. Naruto was in heaven and he wanted this to last forever. no amount of Ika Ika paradise that the pervy sage had written could compare to the real thing in his mind as he was being given his first blow job by the woman who loved him and he loved back despite their age difference. Tsunade likewise was enjoying this immensely, and the fact that Naruto was encouraging her was an even greater turn on for her. She then sensed the twitching and tensing of Naruto's hips and his COC, along with his bucking and rapid breathing, that he was reaching the end of his rope, and she smiled as she continued. And she was rewarded with Naruto's orgasm as he howled out in pleasure, and she felt his COC twitch in her mouth, and sure enough, she felt the first streams of his sperm hitting her throat, and it tasted sweet and salty, a very interesting and good taste, and it was also stronger than before. A bit hotter and much thicker as well, and she decided to enjoy the taste as she took in as much as she could manage, and as she moved back and released Naruto's COC from her mouth, some of the seed flew out from his still twitching sei and struck her face, and some fell to her brias, and she didn't mind that at all, and she swallowed Naruto's seed and then took the remaining seed on her face and brias in her hands and licked them off, and saw Naruto looking at her with wild and lustful eyes. Naruto was overwhelmed by the sight before him and vowed never to forget the sight of the blonde Hokage swallowing his sperm and licking her fingers and hands clean of it right in front of him at the moment. That was the most erotic thing he had ever seen in his entire life. No amount of soft adult magazines could compare to that sight, and he was not going to forget the sight for as long as he lived, and no way was he going to blurt it all out to anyone else that he and Tsunade were doing at this very moment. That was between the two of them alone. Tsunade, however, was far from done as she grabbed her lover's SX and licked the head gently, getting the remaining seed and making Naruto moan out in pleasure, and she then covered the still wet COC with some of her saliva, and then she parted her large brias and placed Naruto's COC between her brias and then used her hands to press her brias together, covering Naruto's COC between her large brias, and as soon as she was sure she was ready, she began to move her body, and Naruto's sei was now being caressed by Tsunade's large bust. Ah, Naruto was in heaven as he felt his eyes nearly go to the back of his head, and the blonde felt like he was going to burn up in the heat of the pleasurable sensations that were running all over his body from left to right, the heat from Tsunade's brias, along with the softness and firmness of the large orbs of flesh. It was amazing. He gripped the rabbit skin mattress tightly as he felt his COC becoming harder and hotter. Tsunade remembered doing this to Dan as well when they were together, and how much of a night they had that time, and she was enjoying this immensely. To hear and see Naruto be in pleasure because of her actions made her even more excited, and she would lick the head of Naruto's COC when it would appear, further adding to the pleasure and sensation flooding the blonde ninja at the moment as he shouted in pleasure her name. Tsunade-chan. Tsunade continued her actions, and Naruto was in heaven until he came, and out came yet another hot load of his seed, and Tsunade eagerly took in his seed into her mouth and allowed the seed to cover her brias and her body for the moment as she reveled in the warmth of them. She smiled as Naruto panted, and she released his COC from the silky and hot confines of her brias, and she then leaned over Naruto and whispered, "Now it's your turn, Naruto-kun." She leaned back and parted her legs before Naruto, and she revealed her wet and dripping sei before him. Naruto blushed bright red as he finally got to see a woman's sei in person, and he couldn't help but stare hotly at the wetness come out, and the patch of blonde fur that was there on top of the slit that further excited him. He smelled an odor that actually smelled very delightful at the moment as he leaned closer towards Tsunade's sei. The blonde Hokage blushed at the way Naruto gazed at her womanhood, and she reached down and grabbed his right hand and guided it to her sei. The second he touched the outer lips, she moaned out in pleasure. As it had been years since anyone had touched her sei with their hands, Naruto gasped a bit at the sensations, and she smiled slyly and replied, Do the same thing to me, Naruto-kun." Naruto gulped as he got the idea and quickly got between Tsunade's thighs and carefully looked at her sei and noted all that he could and saw how coral pink the lips were, just like Tsunade's nippus. He then bent forward and gently kissed her sei, making Tsunade moan out loud, and he took his cue and licked her lips, making Tsunade hiss in pleasure, and he began to lick, kiss and suckle gently on the outer lips, making the blonde Hokage moan out loud in great pleasure and joy at the sensations he was giving her. "Naruto-kun, right there, harder, more." Naruto complied and found the smell of Tsunade's wet sei intoxicating, and the taste of her juices were utterly to his liking as he moved in closer, and then he got an idea and parted the lips, and to his surprise, he saw another set of lips which were of a deeper shade of pink and were wet. He then spotted a small yet strange bulb-like organ up there, and he was about to ask but thought better of it as he kissed and licked both, and the results were explosive as Tsunade shouted in pleasure and arched her back at the sensations that Naruto had unleashed into her body with his actions. The blonde ninja continued his actions as he tasted his lover's Saiyan juices, and Tsunade was in heaven as she made her pleasure and joy evident with her moans and shouts as Naruto stimulated her clitoris and her veina's inner lips. Naruto-kun. Ah. It was then that Tsunade came, the very first orgasm she had ever felt in many years, and it was glorious. She felt all the tension and stress bleed out like a river from her body. And blissful relaxation and joy filled her body all the way to her very bones, and it was a glorious feeling. Naruto lapped up her juices eagerly and relished the sweet nectar that Tsunade unleashed, and as soon as he was able to take in as much as she could manage at the moment, he moved back with her moisture on his face and looked at Tsunade, who was crying. He panicked a bit, and Tsunade saw the concern in his eyes and smiled warmly as she wiped away her tears. "No, I'm fine, Naruto-kun, it's just been so long." Naruto nodded as he understood what she was trying to say, and it was then that he groaned as he felt his COC was now hard and eager once more. It was a glorious feeling, and he saw the wetness that was covering Tsunade's sei, and the blonde Hokage knew what was going through Naruto's mind, and she merely nodded and spoke. "Go ahead, Naruto-kun, I'm ready for this." Naruto knew enough from Jiraiya's perverted books and stories, along with his teachings on what was going to happen between him and Tsunade at this very moment. And he was very eager indeed for this. He was not worried or afraid at the moment. He admitted that all they had done, he had thought of doing with Sakura, but at this moment, he would not want to do this with anyone else but Tsunade, and he did so as he gripped his COC and slowly moved forward between Tsunade's legs, and as soon as he felt his cock's head touch Tsunade's lips and hearing her gasp in pleasure, he pushed forward. Tsunade gasped out loud in pleasure and some pain. It had been years since she had done this, and her use of medical jutsu and keeping herself in prime condition through training, despite her real age, had made her very fit in many ways, and the feel of Naruto's long and thick sei entering her inner womanhood was making her feel very much alive, and she could feel her sei stretch to accommodate Naruto's COC. Naruto groaned and pushed deeper and deeper into Tsunade's wet sei, and he relished the sensations that were filling him to the very bones. "Tsunade-chan, you're so hot and tight. Naruto-kun, you feel so good." Naruto groaned at the tightness, heat, wetness, and softness of Tsunade's sei as he pushed deeper into her, and Tsunade moaned at the heat, thickness and length of Naruto's COC as he pushed deeper into her puss and made her feel more pleasure and more alive than she had ever felt in her entire lifetime. It was then that she gasped out loud as Naruto was now inside her fully as his hips touched hers, and it was making her even more awed at how snugly he fit inside of her. It was like they were made for each other in a very delicious way. The feeling of utterly being filled to the core by Naruto and knowing that he loved her made Tsunade wish deeply that she had been born years earlier so they would have met then, but she placed those thoughts aside and focused on the now, and she moaned out her pleasure and joy at the feeling of being one with Naruto. "You fill me, it's so good. Tsunade-chan." Naruto then got used to the sensations he was feeling, and when he was ready, he began to move his hips, moving backwards at first and then pushing back, reaching all the to Tsunade's inner womb, and it was very delicious feeling for the blonde woman. And as Naruto began to establish his pace and slowly moved in and out of Tsunade's wet sei, and Tsunade was in heaven, and so was he as he felt the heat, wetness, tightness, and softness all over his sei. "Oh yes. That's it, Naruto-kun, more. Tsunade-chan, this feels so good." The two continued their actions as the sounds of their love-making filled the wood, mud, and stone-constructed shelter, and the smell of their juices filled the air as Tsunade held onto Naruto for dear life, as each thrust of Naruto's COC into her wet puss was making her feel even more pleasure and joy as she felt her body heat and sing at the sensations. Naruto likewise was in awe at how hot and wet Tsunade was at this very moment, and how tight as well. The blonde began to increase his pace as he thrust faster and harder into Tsunade, and she encouraged him greatly with her words and her way of holding him tightly to her, as if she didn't want to lose contact with him for any reason. "Harder. Faster. Oh yes. Deeper. You feel so good." Tsunade reached out and held Naruto close to her, and they shared a searing hot kiss, and they thrust each other's tongues into each other's mouths as Naruto continued to thrust himself deeper, faster and harder into Tsunade's hot and willing form and sei. The two kissed fiercely, and when they finally broke for air, Naruto worshipped Tsunade's breasts once more, and the blonde woman held him close as he licked, soothed and kissed her breasts, alternating between the large and delicious orbs of flesh to even things out, and Tsunade gave encouragement to him as she wrapped her legs on his waist to hold him closer to her as he continued to thrust his sei deeply into hers as she guided him on. It was then that Naruto reached the end of his rope that he finally gave into his orgasm, but he managed to make Tsunade come at the very same time, and the two shouted their combined releases, and it was then that Tsunade felt Naruto's COC release his seed into her womb, and it was in the same large quantities that she had gotten before, which was utterly amazing to her as she felt it fill her sei. Naruto swore that he saw bright colors in his vision, and white-hot pleasure flooded his senses as he felt Tsunade's inner sei milk his COC and held it in like a vice, and he was overjoyed by the sensations he was feeling as he thrust in her wet sei several times while still unleashing what was left of his seed into her womb. He felt tired, but he was not going to give up yet. Tsunade released her death grip on Naruto, and the blonde moved away as he felt his COC slid effortlessly out of Tsunade's wet sei, and the blonde genin saw that both he and Tsunade were sweating profusely and they were both blushing bright red. Naruto was still very hard, and Tsunade saw that and relished the sight as she got up and then kissed Naruto and went to her hands and knees and looked at Naruto and spoke in a very seductive tone. "Come on, Naruto-kun, once more." Naruto needed no further invitation as he got up and was on his knees and held Tsunade's hips, and with his COC still covered in their mixed juices, pushed himself to the hilt into Tsunade's puss once more, and the two shouted out in pleasure at the sensations of being joined once more. Naruto held onto Tsunade's hips and relished the delicious feel of Tsunade's vena surrounding his in this angle, and it felt even tighter in some way. "Oh yes, more." Naruto complied and began to move his hips, but unlike before, he was going at full throttle as he thrust into Tsunade from behind this time. The blonde woman moaned her desire and joy as they were now doing the style associated with dogs, but she cared little for the animal reference as she was more concerned as Naruto was hitting her sweet spot all over again, and it was doubling the joy and pleasure that she was feeling at this very moment, and she was loving the utter abandon that Naruto displayed as he took her from behind. "Tsunade-chan. Naruto-kun. More. Harder." Naruto complied with Tsunade's wishes as he held her hips tightly and moved faster with his hips, and he then leaned over Tsunade's back and kissed her back gently and passionately, sending delicious shivers up and down Tsunade's spine, doubling the pleasure he was having at the moment, and so was Tsunade as she moaned out at the sensations that she felt running up her spine at the moment. Naruto then reached downwards and held Tsunade's breasts as they moved back and forth from his actions and her own as she had moved her hips in counter to his own, making the pleasure for both of them more intense and more raw as well. Tsunade was loving this as she turned and Naruto kissed her as their faces met. The two continued with their actions until they finally reached their respective limits, and then, to their one amazement and pleasure, they came at the very same time once again, and they were shouting their pleasure at the very same time as Naruto felt Tsunade's sei milk his COC like a voice once more, while Tsunade felt the hot seed of her lover flood her innermost body and nearly made her black out in the utter pleasure of it all. The two panted and felt themselves finally reach their limits as satisfaction and pleasure filled them to the brim, and the smell of their actions had filled the shelter to the max, with their fire outside still giving plenty of warmth, and the small pots containing the natural mosquito repellent holding away the bugs. Tsunade panted and felt her heartbeat begin to calm down as she turned and looked at Naruto, who was panting next to her. She smiled warmly as she reached out and touched his face, and he moaned and looked back at her with shining eyes with tears, making Tsunade worry about why he was seemingly crying before her. "Naruto, are you all right?" Naruto nodded and wiped his tears and replied, "I'm just happy, Tsunade-chan. I've never felt this way before. Thank you for loving me always." Tsunade smiled as she knew that Naruto was telling the truth to her, and she guided Naruto lie before her in the shelter that they had, and he covered the two of them with the rabbit skin blanket, and the two kissed each other more deeply as Tsunade gently wiped away Naruto's tears, and she felt her own heart feel warm as she felt Naruto's seed in her womb. It warmed her heart and she hugged the blonde genin and they both went to sleep. The next day, Tsunade woke up feeling refreshed for some reason, and amazingly she was not feeling the effects of sake in her head, and for a brief moment, she wondered why that was the case, until she remembered what happened last night between her and Naruto. The blonde Hokage moved up and couldn't help but blush bright red at the memories on how Naruto and her had made love. It had been years since she had ever been in bed with a man, and she feared that she would never feel the joy and pleasure of being with a man in the most intimate sense, but she felt it again and she felt very happy with the things they had done. Apparently she would have to thank Jiraiya for teaching Naruto the finer points of being with a woman. She reached for the blanket made from rabbit skin that they had made and she held the soft skins to her gnawed form and she sighed as her memories of last night warmed her and made her feel very much in desire again. She really had to thank Jiraiya later on, though how she would reward him was going to be a surprise that she knew she would hate herself for allowing but was worth it. She turned and there was Naruto walking back into the camp with a triumphant smile on his face, carrying a large pole on his shoulders and on one end was a quartet of freshly killed rabbits and some fresh river fish on the other. Apparently Naruto had woken up early to go hunting and fishing for their breakfast. The blonde woman stood up and wrapped the rabbit skin blanket around her nud form and walked to Naruto who was wearing only his pants and was bare from the waist up, showing his toned and well-muscled form, the same form she had kissed, caressed and tasted last night, and seeing him like that in the sun and with a warm smile on his handsome face made Tsunade feel young and very energetic as well. Naruto-chan, good morning to you. Naruto smiled and placed the pole on a pair of tripods and kissed Tsunade hotly on the lips in greeting, happy with the endearment, and he couldn't help but tease her a bit with the rabbit skin blanket. You look very attractive all wrapped up in furs, Tsunade-chan. The blonde Hokage smirked as she moved back to get properly dressed for the day. Naruto was currently cooking the food and so was Tsunade. Two of the rabbits were now being roasted on a nearby fire and covered in small amounts of wild honey while Naruto turned them, while the other pair were also skinned, as well as boned and cut into pieces and were in a pot for boiling and mixed with sliced spring onions, carrots, wild pepper, and rosemary to become soup. The smells were heavenly and the fish were set on a pole to be dried and cured for later. The blonde Hokage was dressed in her usual clothes and bare of the jacket and she felt more alive than ever before here. It was hard to believe that last night, which she would have thought would have been the worst night of her life on this island, had turned into one of her most wonderful experiences, and being close to someone who she loved dearly and loved her back was nice, that and being away from the hassles of being the Hokage for a while was refreshing and she would remember this for a long while. Naruto had deployed several kage bushin to act as lookouts on different parts of the island and near the signal fires that they had built a while back. Unknown to her, as Naruto was cooking the food, the blonde boy was talking to his resident. So, you enjoyed last night? Yeah, I had no idea that Tsunade-chan was so attractive in the firelight, and more besides. Hey, I figured as much since the day we got stuck on this island. Well then, I guess you can say that last night was a good thing for both you and her. I guess. What's eating you suddenly, Kit? You don't sound too happy. Well, she's the Hokage and all, and it would look real bad if the others in the village found out about this. That will only happen if either of you are careless and blurt it out, plus there is the kage bushin after all, there's plenty of other uses for that jutsu after all. You perverted demon. Why thank you, I take it there's more. Well, she's a very strong and attractive woman, but she's older than me, and I worry about that a bit. Oh that, well I've got a surprise for you too. You see, I kind of interfered when you finally fired the loads last night. What the hell have you done to Tsunade-chan? Relax will you? Nothing bad happened. And no, she's not pregnant either. I know how much of a pain that will be if you two suddenly had kids. Rather, I imbued some powerful healing and restorative chakra into her body, revitalizing her cells and life force. Nothing harmful, and the benefit is that she's back to being several years younger. Hehehehe. What? You made Tsunade-chan young again? Oh yes, at least you won't ever have to call her old anymore. I took the liberty of removing 30 years from her age so she really back to being young again, so no need for the henge anymore. And when you do decide to tie the knot, then you can have children, that will make her real happy. I don't know what to say. A simple thank you would be nice. Thanks Kyubi. Hehe, you're welcome. It was then that Tsunade had finished the meals and they were having a veritable feast when Naruto gave a warm smile and stood up and he spoke. There's a ship heading this way, Tsunade-chan, and the kage bushin lit the fires. Tsunade was happy with the news and they moved to the area where one of their lit signal fires was located, and there in the area was a ship and it was getting bigger by the minute and it was heading in their direction. Tsunade and Naruto waited and saw that the boat carried the symbol of Konoha and things were finally looking up between the two of them. Epilogue. Naruto ran through the streets of Konoha and made his way to the tower in the village, curious as to what was happening there at the moment. The genin had recently returned from a mission with his team in tracking down another band of Akatsuki members and underlings when he had been visited by Shizune, who told him that Tsunade wanted to see him, and late at night too, something which was odd in the mind of the blonde genin. Naruto wondered what was going on and hoped that Tsunade was alright. He knew that the Council of Konoha were usually getting on his Tsunade-chan's nerves when they could in being overly critical with her duties, and that galled him a lot at times. Of course he didn't bother her too much as he knew that she was more than capable at handling herself. Many had noted a change in Tsunade as she was more determined, focused, and dedicated to her duties as Hokage, and still as defiant as ever towards the council. Jiraiya felt like his greatest dreams had come true when Tsunade had allowed him 8 months of unrestricted peeking at the women of Konoha, under the condition that he both kept his actions discreet and he stayed away from the Hokage tower and residence for the said periods. As he arrived at the tower, he was surprised to find the main door sealed shut, and that meant he would have to sneak in at the tower. He decided to find out if this was a trap or a prank being pulled by someone. He entered through a nearby window and was surprised at the fact that there were no Anbu to stop him. He entered the door to the Hokage's office and looked inside carefully, only to have the door open quickly and him nearly losing his footing and hitting the floor. He heard the door close behind him and he managed to get up and ready for a fight, that is until he saw just who was there. Tsunade smiled warmly at her late-night visitor and she was certainly pleased that Naruto had arrived on time. "You made it, Naruto Koichi, I hoped you would." Naruto looked at Tsunade, who helped him up, and then without any warning, Tsunade kissed him right on the lips and hugged him tight, allowing Naruto to feel her breast pressing on his chest, and he replied with a deep kiss to the blonde young again Hokage. When he told Tsunade what the Kyuubi had done to her, she was at first shocked, but quickly became ecstatic with the news and vowed to keep it a secret, along with him. And this meant that if given a few more years, Naruto would be ready for marriage, and Tsunade had every intention to have a family with her loved one. Having a family would finally allow her a chance to be complete and to be whole again, along with giving the council further headaches, which was something she relished a great deal, to finally give the village elders a piece of her mind. As they broke away, Naruto smiled at Tsunade as she took him to the private room she had in the Hokage tower and wasted little time as she closed the door behind them, and she slowly stripped before her lover, and Naruto gulped once more as Tsunade daintily sat down on the bed and was bare of any clothing and beckoned to him with her free hand, and she both blushing and smiling at the same time. "Come on, Naruto Koichi, I'm waiting." As Naruto removed his clothes and was assured that the door was properly sealed and locked, the Kyuubi was looking through the eyes of his container and smiled as the demon fox recorded this event. He was going to have a field day with this beauty of a record. "Man Kit, you are one lucky son of a gun to have such a hottie for a loved one. Hey, I hope to see some pretty tough and strong kids in the near future." To be continued. Author's notes. Sorry for the delays, had some issue with the internet. Well, that wraps up this one, and the theme for this little piece is that love does not have to be determined by age alone, and despite Tsunade being far older than Naruto, love can blossom in the right situation and circumstances, though with Tsunade now back to being in her younger age, there's not much in terms of issue in the age department now, is there? This is the 4th pairing, and I have to admit that this was a hard one, as trying to make this as believable as possible was no easy feat, mind you, so I am happy that it turned out this way, though a lot more work could have been done honestly, and I think it's going to need some serious checking up. But I think that this will do for the time being, as I have a lot to update here and there. I use the fact that Naruto reminds Tsunade of both Dan and Nawaki, 2 men she loved dearly in life. One was family, the other was a loved one, and I figured giving Tsunade a chance to have a chance at love, and become young again and be able to have a family and to be happy is a worthy goal for all the efforts I put into this particular story. If it is all right to you readers, then thank you, but if is not, then please be civil in saying so. I don't like flames in any fashion, constructive critiques are fine by me. Now, before anyone asks me on whether I'll try making a series bit with Naruto and 2 women, then I will, but for the time being there will be one-on-one pairings at the moment, so be patient. Besides, while some pairings are easy, others will take time to properly execute, plan, and work out so to make them believable. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review, I would love to hear your feedback. especially if it helps me improve the overall story.